All right, guys, as I was saying, this develop your own camera setup checklist. So if you're an airplane pilot, no matter how long you've been flying, whatever, you get into the cockpit, you have a checklist. It's just a thing that you go through. It's a step-by-step that you go through. No matter how well you know this stuff, you'll forget stuff, and it's just a way to make sure that everything is okay and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna touch on a few items here today. But I want you to really think about this, spend a little bit of time on this and really try to, figure out kind of what really will keep you from making unrecoverable mistakes. So to that point, or looking at it from that perspective, you guys grab a camera, you guys just grab these cameras, right? You have no idea who's had them before, so what's your first move? What's the very first thing you do when you grab a camera, when you pick up a camera and you're ready for a day of shooting? I'm sorry, what? I wouldn't even check. I would plug the batteries in, right? I mean, I would just immediately go, because you're absolutely right. If you have no power, you cannot shoot. Horrible, 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 horrible. So first things first, always. Battery chargers, spares, backups. You need to start thinking now as you're starting to move into more professional arena is redundancy, backups, that kind of stuff. Now, typically for me, when I am in a studio like this, I will not necessarily bring, if I'm bringing my own cameras, I will not necessarily bring a second camera as a backup in case my first one fails, because they have cameras here. I know I've sort of got that is sort of like built in, right? But if I'm going to go on location, the idea that you're going to go out with a single camera is unacceptable. You can't do it. Cameras break. Shit happens. You can't do it. You also can't go out with a single computer. If you're shooting tethered, you can't do that. So it's just, you need to start thinking kind of like in those terms, right? Okay, so we've talked about battery first. What's your next move? Go for it.
Check if it's in RAW, assuming you're in a situation where you're not forced to shoot it.
That would certainly be, that's certainly going to be on the list, but that would not be the next thing that I actually check. What would be anybody else? Any other ideas? Yes? If you're shooting to card, sure. I don't ever shoot to card, so but that being said, I do have a card in case all of a sudden my connection, my tether connection, whatever, if that goes down, I can still shoot if I've got a card. So all of those things should be on your list, right? But that's not going to be the next thing I actually do. After I've plugged in my batteries, maybe the next most important thing you do, especially if it's a rental camera or a common camera like they have here. We'll get to all of that. That'll be later down in the list because those things are important. No, all those things are important, and I'm going to show you guys, we're going to step through a lot of that. Yes? Camera settings, all are going to be important, but I'm really not focused that deep yet. I'm still more on the exterior, so I'm going to just make this easy. Go for it.
Like, I guess just physical damage, like lead on the lens.
So all of those things do matter. So yeah, but for me, the first thing, the next move I make after I plug my battery in, and you can do this all with me. So again, I know that we're sharing the love here, right? So you can actually, one person can take this off and the other person on the team can put it back on. Anyway, but what I do is, this eyepiece that's around the back of that, if you pinch it, you'll see that there's two little ridges on the side. Well here, hang on. I've spent all this time to set this up and now I'm not taking advantage of it. So hang on one second. These little ridges right here on the side, that little ridge, and there's another one on, anyway, you pinch these together and then you can pull this whole thing, this whole piece comes off. And you can see down in here, this is the viewfinder itself. There's a really important little control right here. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But this thing right here, this thing right here. So the person who used this camera before you had pink eye. And you don't do anything about that. So you just grab this camera and you just jam it up right into your eye and now you have pink eye. Not a good move. Like religion, I clean these things. What's the best cleaner that you can use to clean this with? We had this conversation last week. What's your number one cleaner? First one you go to? Dishwashing liquid, and that's what you would use on this. It's the best thing you can use on this. That's what I would use. If you can't get that, anything that you can get, again, after COVID, there is like, Perel clean shit everywhere. Everybody's got wipes or a pump or something, or half this class has probably got some sort of something in their backpack or whatever that will actually clean this thing. That's another option. I shoot in fashion and beauty. I can go to a hair and makeup artist. They'll have acetone because they'll have a fingernail polish remover. Now, acetone seems overkill to me on this, but nonetheless, I would never put this next to my eye. Now, for people who wear glasses, you have some protection built in if you shoot with your glasses on. So again, there's some barrier in there. But you can set up your cameras to shoot with or without glasses. It all depends on, you can actually set your camera to your eyeglass prescription. So we're gonna look at that right now. That's a possibility. But for people who wear glasses all the time, I wear glasses all the time, right? So for me to do like this kind of thing as I'm, going to shoot, and it gets weird because if you take your glasses up like this and then you actually need to change the menu item, I can't see the menu item now because I don't have my glasses on. So there's a trade-off if you actually set this diopter to be your lens prescription, but nonetheless. So this is the first thing that I would change. So I am going to ask all of you to go clean this right now because I'm going to ask you to put this camera, you're going to need to look through this thing. So everybody come with me. We're going to go clean these things really quickly. I'm going to pause this video because you don't need it to be called. This is just an eyepiece. Yeah. Pause. Alrighty. So now, don't put this thing back on yet, because what you're now going to look for is this thing right here. So there's a little dial. You'll see it's got a plus or minus. We just uncovered it. So it's this little dial right here. Hang on one second, guys. I think I can flip my screen is, my right to left is not my right to left anymore. Perfect. Okay, much better. So anyway, it's this little dial right here. This is called a diopter. What this does is it controls a lens that's inside your viewfinder. So you need to set this to focus for your eyes. So if you're wearing glasses and you're going to keep glasses on, that's fine. You're going to set this diopter with your glasses on. If you don't wear glasses, you're going to set this without glasses on because you don't wear glasses. But if you prefer to shoot without your glasses on, then that's how you would set this diopter. So in order to actually set this thing, what we're going to do is we're going to turn the camera on. So you guys pretty much all know how to do that. The little on switch right there. You're going to tap the screen, and then as you look through your camera, I still got my lens cap on. I'm not even looking through. What you're looking at is, if you look at the very bottom of the screen when you're looking inside there, you'll see an LED readout, and it's your shutter speeds, your f-stops, it's your exposure meter, it's like lit up, right? You want to take this little wheel right here and you want to rotate it in both directions. What you're trying to do is focus that LED that's on the inside, because what that LED represents is that LED is the focal plane inside of your camera. So if you have it in focus, then the image, when it is resolved on the mirror in your camera, will also be in focus. So it's the first thing you actually set, because otherwise you're not going to see anything. Now, every person who shoots is going to have a different setting. So if you're sharing cameras, you just need to know that the minute if you're like going back and forth, you're in a team situation, whatever, it would be very odd if everybody ended up having the same diopter setting. So it's just something to remember. This is something that exists in every single high-end camera in the world. So if you have never set the diopter setting of your camera, that should be the first thing you do when you get home, right? So again, this part matters because even though most people, or a lot of people, use autofocus, it's really disconcerting if you've got autofocus on and you get an autofocus confirmation, but you're looking at an image that's totally blurry, right? And it's just like, well, that doesn't look like that's in focus. That's probably because this diopter has not been set. Make sense? So again, first thing that this has got to be on the top of your list as you're working your way down. So then I'm going to put this eyepiece back on. It just slides on. You'll see it'll lock into place. Now, on these cameras, they don't have them. I don't see, nope, actually I've got mine right here. If you take a look at this camera strap, there's a little like square rubber thing on it. This square rubber thing is designed for long exposures, and the way this works is I'm going to take this cover back off again, my eyepiece. Again, you just pinch it and pull up. This cover is designed to fit over this piece like this, so that no light can actually enter into this. That's what's going on here. And the reason we have this is that when you're shooting in a typical shooting situation without this thing on, you're actually putting your eye up to this thing. You put your eye up, and your eye is actually covering this thing. So no light can get into this viewfinder because your face is covering it, right? But if you do really long exposures, like there's people who do 24-hour exposures, 48-hour exposures, the people do that kind of stuff. You don't want to be standing here with your face covering this little spot right here for 48 hours. You don't want to stand like that, right? So the problem that you have is that light can enter through this and go back through the reverse version of the whole mirror system and actually expose your sensor. So it nullifies, you can't do those kinds of exposures. Now, a lot of cameras, you'll see with when we get to the face cameras, whatever, they actually have a little, there'll be a switch on one side, and you flip a switch, and there's an internal lens cover that pops up open into here. A lot of higher end cameras have that built in. Like if you go, this is the 5D series, if you go to the 1D series, which is really the flagship of Canon, there's a better chance than not that this little cover part for this is actually built into the housing that's in here. So you don't worry about losing it. This thing, unfortunately, most people throw these things away when they unpack their camera. Yes? Is what? Actually, no. In a mirrorless camera, that wouldn't be an issue because that's all emissive technology that's projecting that image to you. So there, I say that there may be a mirrorless cameras. No, there can't be. I'm trying to think of if there could possibly be a mirrorless camera system that actually used a direct something other than electronic viewfinder. It's conceivable, but I don't know why anybody would build that camera. So no, I don't think that's really an issue. Anyway, so I'm going to put this back on now, just so that you know that that's part on there. So then the next things are somewhat obvious. I mean, you guys have mentioned a lot of these already, but what I'm going to show you is we're going to take a look at the back of this and at the menu setup on this guy. So if you flip your camera over and you click on the menu button, it'll actually open up. And you can see there's a series of icons along the top. I think these are all touchscreen now, this whole mirror in the back. So if you take a look, I'm going to actually start at the very beginning, the menu item that's all the way over to the left-hand side, the one that's a little camera, which is, in my opinion, somewhat poorly designed because there's another little camera icon right up here, but we'll get to that one later. Anyway, when you click on this, it'll actually go to the setup. So this is how, these are the things that you use to actually set your camera up. Sorry, I'm trying to get that a little more in focus, but that's going to be as good as it gets. So at any rate, you'll also notice that there's a series of sub-menus that go up here. So right now we're in camera, the first one. If you can actually use your finger, but you can also use your scroll wheel. The scroll wheel that's up by your shutter button, this one that's up here, right here, will actually scroll you through these sub-menus. And then this bigger wheel down here will actually take you down into specific menu items, but it's also touchscreen as well. But anyway, you can see that as I'm going along the top, there's actually 6 sub-menus for this camera. And so to go through this, this is actually where you would set up your camera. And so we're going to go ahead and set mine up. You can see mine right now is actually set up to, sorry. I wish I could get this focused a little bit better, but anyway, you guys will get what's looking at your camera. If you take a look at the top thing, it says image quality. So image quality, mine, it looks like a sort of a, it's supposed to be like a little mountain with an L next to it. That actually is telling me that this is a large, high quality JPEG is what's in here. and we do not want to shoot necessarily in JPEG. There are reasons to consider this, but we'll get to that in a second. So to go in and change this thing, you need to make sure that the image quality is selected, it's highlighted. Again, you can touch it with your finger, or you can go up. You can use, sorry, if you need to go back, you just hit the menu button again. You can use the scroll wheel that's at the very, this wheel that's on the back side. So I'm going to go to image quality. I'm going to hit the set button right here. That takes me into the image setting. And you'll notice there's two rows. There's a RAW row that's sitting up at the top, and then there's a JPEG row that's sitting at the bottom. In my case right now, if you take a look, the RAW has actually been turned off. That's why there's a square around this little blue slash. We are going to set it to RAW. So again, you can either tap it, or you can use the control wheel that's up by your shutter release button to go to RAW. Now, there are different versions of RAW. There is a RAW, there is an MRAW that stands for medium RAW, and then there is an SRAW that stands for small RAW. They are all RAW file formats. It's just that what happens is that in medium RAW, what they end up doing is they take a 4 square of pixels, average them together, and that becomes 1 pixel. So this ends up being a quarter of the size of the actual RAW file. SRAW, they do the same thing again, except instead of doing a 4 square, they do like a 6 square or an 8 square pixels, average those together. The problem that you're going to run into, though, with RAW and with medium RAW and SRAW is that there are very few programs that can read it. I'm not sure, I can't swear to this now because they keep coming out with new versions of Photoshop. Camera Raw cannot read a lot of these proprietary small RAW file formats. It will be able to read the regular RAW with no problem. So you would always set it at the regular one. I avoid these medium RAWs and SRAWs. They're just, again, they work really well inside of Canon's own proprietary software, but you bring this into Photoshop, there's a good chance it will not, simply won't be able to read it. And certainly Capture One won't probably be able to read it. So just be wary of that. Now in this case, you can also see that I've got another square that's still around that L with the really sort of, what it's supposed to be is you'll see there's an L and there's two L's, and one of them has sort of got a smooth mountain next to it, and the other one's got a jagged, steppy mountain to it. That all has to do with compression. So this is considered a large RAW with very little compression. The one next to it is also a large RAW, so we're talking about image resolution now, but with a lot of compression on it, so it's stepped on pretty hard. Then you go to a medium resolution, that's what the M is, again, not compressed too much, and then a medium that's really stepped on, and then you continue to work your whole way over in terms of all of that. So in most cases, most people should not be shooting in RAW. Is that true for everybody all the time? When would you want to shoot RAW? I mean, when would you want to shoot a JPEG?
If you're in like a photojournalism situation where you have to send them over like immediately from camera, it's definitely better to shoot.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. There was a really famous photographer who worked at the New York Times. He was covering the Olympics when they were in Sochi in Russia, and he was covering speed skating, and he had a phone. He had a satellite phone with a hookup, and he was shooting tethered to his computer, and he had set up to automatically upload every single image that he was shooting to the satellite, and then it was downloaded at the New York Times offices back in New York, and his turnaround time from shooting a picture to when they got it was about 10 minutes. Impossible to do with a RAW file. That would just too much data you're trying to push over. Other things, if you need really high burst rate, so again, and this becomes a big thing for sports, but if you need to shoot, if you need to basically push the shutter button down and have it fire repeatedly, it's on continuous, but repeatedly fire as fast as you possibly can do it, you can't do that if you're actually shooting RAW. What happens with RAW is there's a buffer inside this camera that will fill up, and all of a sudden you won't be able to shoot the button anymore. You won't be able to push the button down anymore. To get over that, you go to a small RAW. If you don't need the resolution and you can step on it, then you can shoot much faster because they're much smaller files. So I'm going to actually see something in here really quickly. Hang on one second, just to show you about that buffer, because this is a good one to actually know. Yeah, okay. So I need everybody to take a look through their camera. And again, we'll share. So one person take a look at it, and then we'll take another person to look at it. So if you tap your shutter button, what you should see is on the left hand, I'm looking at the LED readout at the bottom of this. So unfortunately, I don't think I, wow, that almost shows, doesn't it? Yeah, so you see that 125th? That's on the left side of my camera. Well, anyway, I'm going to just do it here. So starting from left to right, we start with a shutter speed that's on the far left-hand side. Then you go to an aperture. Then in the middle, we actually go to an exposure range. So this is the metering system in your camera. So you're trying to, when you're trying to adjust your exposure, you're trying to get that little, the little dot right in the middle, the little sort of upright part in the middle. Next to that is ISO. And then you see a number that's in parentheses on the far right-hand side. I need everybody to look through here and see that. So share your camera. You need to see, go ahead and tap on it. What I'm looking for, in my case right now, you'll see in my case, it's a 66. Yours may be different. Most of yours, if you've set yours to RAW, will be a 13. Is that what number does everybody see in the? You have 16? Okay, so what you are looking at is that is a buffer that sits inside this camera. So when you start to shoot, immediately it offloads the information that's on your sensor into that buffer, and it's incredibly fast. It's all electronic. It's sitting inside of your camera. Then what happens is that the slower process of this going either to a card or out to your computer in a tethered setup, then images leave that buffer one at a time. And if you are shooting slow enough, you will never see that number change. But if you're a fast shooter and you are shooting RAWs, full scale RAWs, whatever, well, you can see it right now. I'm gonna set mine to actually shoot RAW because mine never got changed. So again, to change this, click on set, go in. I'm gonna set the top one to RAW. I'm gonna turn the bottom one off. You can actually shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time. There's reasons that some people might want to do that. The advantage to it is that you'll have a RAW file, but let's say you're shooting and it's for a magazine and they need immediate stuff for layout. They don't need a RAW file to actually retouch or to do any of that stuff. They just need what they call it an FPO, for position only. It's just a quick image that you can send to them so that they can edit it and say, oh yeah, I like frame number 10 the best, whatever. And then it goes on down the line. It'll go to, you know, you're probably the tech will develop stuff out. That'll go to the retouching department and then ultimately get thrown into the layout. But so there are reasons to actually do both. In most cases, there's not. So you use the bottom wheel to get rid of the JPEG version of that and then hit the set button. And now you can see that the image quality is set to shoot in RAW. So when I look through mine, it's set to 13. That's the typical one on mine. Yours may be different. It depends on how you've got it set. I would check it to make sure it's only RAW. But what I want everybody to do right now is just shoot as fast as you can. Just keep shooting as fast as you can. Now, we don't have a card in here, so it's not having to write anything out, so I'm not going to bottom out in this. But typically, if we were shooting tethered or we were shooting to card, what ends up happening is there's a backlog. And so the writing to the card or to the computer can't keep up with how fast we're shooting. We're shooting too fast. So that number, you will see it drop down, and the minute you hit 0, you can't shoot anymore. Your shutter will not release. So all of a sudden you're working with a photographer and he thinks his camera or her camera or their camera has quit working. It hasn't quit working. They've just filled up the buffer in the camera. You need to say, take a break for a minute, let this thing recover, and you'll slowly see the number go right back up to whatever its limit was in the beginning. But it's just an important thing to understand that part because people, I can't tell you the number of people who think their cameras are broken and they're not. Yes? No, the write speed is what's controlling it all. So if you have a faster SD card that will accept a faster write, this is less of a problem. If you've got an older, slower SD card, then this becomes a serious problem. But I've had this become a serious problem on computers. So when you're shooting tethered, again, the problem with shooting tethered is you're going out over a USB cable, which is nowhere near as fast as the internal electronics that are in here. So it's just to be aware of that and know that that's happening. A lot of times when I'm shooting, I will try to pace my shooting around it so that when I do bottom out, it's time for sort of a natural break, and we'll stop and just sort of say, okay, yeah, everybody good here, whatever. You know, you can figure that part out. But it's just knowing what this stuff is and understanding what it is. I'm going to go out on a limb and say between diopters and that buffer, I've hit stuff that you guys have never heard of. That's okay. Okay, so then the next thing, again, I'm going to go back to the whole menu system here. We're going to actually look at a couple things right here. So we've set this up to raw, and then pretty much the rest of it, you can sort of kind of like leave where it is. But the problem that we have with this is that we don't know how anybody has set this up previously. So for instance, if I go to my next frame, there's exposure compensation. I can see that it's zeroed out. My ISO settings I'm not going to worry about right now because I typically use the upper frame to deal with, to change ISO, this little button right here. It's just easier for me to do that than it is to go through here. White balance. So we're looking down here at average white balance right here. Does white balance matter when you're shooting raw? Why not? Say what? Well, if you have a color checker, you can set your white balance. My question was that if you are shooting raw, do you need to set the white balance in this camera? No. The thing you need to know about raw is that raw doesn't know what color it is. Raw understands the relationship of red to green to blue. It understands that if, like this strap right here, if I'm photographing the red part on this strap, the raw file itself understands that there is a dominance of red and very little, in this case, very little green and very little blue. It understands that, but I can set this color, I can set it, the raw file to be any color I want it to be. It understands, again, the relationship. It understands a lot of red, very little green, very little blue, but it doesn't understand that this is fundamentally a red. It only understands that relationship. You have to set the color, and that's, again, where a color card would come in, all that kind of stuff. We'll get into doing color card exposure, metering, all that kind of stuff next week. But the important issue here is that you do not need to white balance this file. Again, it doesn't mean anything. The raw file itself won't contain. The metadata may contain what this was set to, but it has absolutely no impact on what you're shooting it at all. However, if you're shooting JPEG, that is a different animal altogether. If you are shooting JPEG, this radically matters because these are the settings. A JPEG is actually processed inside this camera body. And so things like white balance matter here because that will impact how you are actually, how that JPEG is being processed. So you have some control over the JPEG processing that's inside this camera, but in terms of shooting raw, it's meaningless. It doesn't matter at all. So color space, this is set to sRGB. Does that matter? No, it does not matter. It's the same argument. When you are shooting raw, you are in the color space of this camera. This camera is actually, it's either a 14 or a 16-bit color space it's inside, but it's whatever the sensor can actually capture. That's what the color space is. Now, you know sRGB because, and Adobe RGB and all that kind of stuff. You can change these color spaces, but again, RAW doesn't understand any of this. JPEGs do. So if you are then changing this color space and you are shooting JPEGs, if you leave it at sRGB, your JPEGs as their output will be sRGB. If you change this to Adobe RGB, your JPEGs will have Adobe RGB when they are output. Again, a RAW file has no official color space other than that of the sensor that's actually in here. And that's not an official color space, right? Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so as I work my way over here, I'm going to go over to the next one. We're not going to spend a lot of time here. Picture style, again, that is a JPEG only thing. These long exposure, noise reductions, whatever, most people will tell you to stay away from this like the plague. These do really funky things to your images in here, and it's just, this is not a good place to play. This is not a good place to try to change this and say, oh yeah, high ISO, speed, noise reduction. You'll end up with an image that looks like it was painted with crowns. Highlight tone priority. The problem that we have with all of these things in here is that when you shoot a picture of this, and how many of you shoot a picture and then take a look at the back of the camera to see what you just did? Most of you do, right? My suggestion to you, take a big old piece of gaffer's tape and cover the back of this after you get it set up right. Why do I say that? Why, Verser, why? Go for it. They are previews of JPEGs that are being created based on your settings in here. So if you set this thing to sRGB, you're looking at an sRGB JPEG, which can show you nowhere near the highlight range and the shadow detail that you have in a raw file. So you put on things like highlight tone priority or highlight tone warning. How many of you have your little warning on so that if you shoot something that the camera believes has actually gone beyond the white point of the sensor, it starts to blink in red? You can set those up, but the problem is that it's pointing out clipping of the JPEG that you are looking at, not the raw file that you're shooting. And the problem with that is that that forces you to underexpose, you're trying to protect your highlights, to underexpose, and the reality is that you don't need that, and you are giving up really precious data if you underexpose a file. We'll get into exposure and the consequences of that next week. All right, so I'm going to blow through the rest of this pretty quickly here just to say, so again, picture style doesn't matter. All this anti-flicker shoot, this kind of stuff, anti-flicker shooting, if you are actually shooting under fluorescent lights, like these lights right here, I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys, but if you, especially the older series green fluorescent lights, do you ever see, if you take a look at the light, it doesn't look continuous tone, it looks like a series of dots or a series of flashes? That's because when electricity goes through these lights, we live in a world of what they call alternating current, what we call AC, right? DC are batteries, AC is what comes out of these walls. What that means is that the current actually changes direction either 50 times a minute or 60 times a minute. So you'll notice if you ever look at a plug or you get a hair dryer, the hair dryer says it's 120 volts at 50 hertz or 120 volts at 60 hertz, that kind of stuff. The hertz thing doesn't really matter in a hair dryer, but in a situation where you've got lighting for video, it matters because what you're using when you're shooting video is you've actually got a shutter that's opening and closing here. And what you want to do is you want to sync that shutter, if you're shooting video, to time itself to the flicker of those lights. So you look on your lights and it says either 50 or 60 hertz and you go in here and you change all of that. That's for video. I think people believe that somehow if you're a still photographer you should be able to shoot video like it's the same thing. It's not. So anyway, I'm not going to go down that road too much. If we go on to the next thing, there's live view, there's auto, there's all this other stuff in here. If we go to the next of the frames over, the autofocus one up here, they have all sorts of autofocus strategies. How many of you guys go in here and actually change your autofocusing strategies? Yeah, I'm just going to tell you this is how Canon sells cameras. There is no advantage to doing this. There's so many easy ways to fuck these cameras up, and this is one of them. So I'm going to blow through all the autofocus stuff. Don't worry, I'm not ignoring it. I'm going to come back to it later. The next part only has to do with if you actually are shooting to cards and you're doing your editing on your camera. I don't know any reason that anybody would want to edit on this camera or want to cull their images on this camera. That just seems like silly to me. Again, I would want to bring them into a computer where I could really see them, but nonetheless, I wouldn't be printing out of this thing either. So I'm going to blow through all of that as well and get into the next part. In the next part, this stuff actually does matter. So in the next part here, you can get in and you can talk about the file naming and numbering if you were going from card to card. The big issue that matters to us to here is the format card. So if you come down to format card and you click on this, it'll say, well, there's no card in your camera to format, which is fine. The point being is that what I'm going to ask you guys about is that when do you format your card? And how do you format your card? Go for it.
Well, you can format it after everything's been backed up to like 3 separate places.
Right.
So that you're probably not going to lose it.
Right?
And if you want to like format it in a way where you like actually lose everything and it's unrecoverable, you wouldn't do it in this camera. Because if you do it, this is like a quick format. So technically, if there's like software that can recover stuff, you would need to usually live on, you would do it in the software that's like on the computer.
Yeah, so I will that brings up so many great points, right? And I don't know if my mic is sensitive enough to hear those points, so I'm going to kind of reiterate my response to that and also reiterate your question as well, or the dealing with that. So when do you actually format your card? You format your card when somebody puts a gun to your head and says you need to use that card right now and not before. There's so many people who are in the worst habit of all is that they will download all of their images to a computer and immediately format the card. Why? You don't need it then. If you're going to shoot to it again right then yeah, you reformat it right then. But otherwise, you do not reformat a card ever until you have to use it. Because as long as you have not formatted it, you've still got the images that are on it that you shot. So if all of a sudden everything goes to hell and you just have one card, somebody stole your computer and took all the images with them, but you've got that one card and it's got 10 images on there, well, at least you've got that, right? But if you're just in the habit of formatting your card right away, no. Some people will actually slip their card into a card reader and then use the software in their computer to format the card. You cannot make a bigger mistake. So to your point about that, people who actually do that not only can get rid of all the images, so if you don't want somebody to see the images on your card, that kind of stuff, yes, right, that, but the card itself can become unusable. Never format your card in anything except the camera that it's going to be used in. So I'm going to tell you a story about this just how important this is. Most pro photographers I know, myself included, would never, ever, ever use a card that was formatted for a 5D Mark II Canon in any other camera ever, even though you can put it in another camera and format that card. So I have a 5D Mark III and I have a 5D Mark IV, both made by Canon. I have my cards labeled separately, so I only use the 5D Mark IV cards and in the 4, and I only use the 5D Mark III cards in the 3. Never ever. That's how finicky formatting can actually be. I know photographers who will actually own 2 5D Mark IV bodies, and they will actually mark it separate. Only this serial number of that camera has got these cards in it, and this serial number of the camera's got those cards in it. I mean, that's how specific people can get about this stuff. So formatting cards is a really dicey, tricky thing, and again, the less you can do, the better off you are. What size cards do you guys carry? What size cards do you shoot to? Anybody? 250s, 250, gigabytes, right? Yeah. Anybody else? 128s. So how many images can you get on a 128 ballpark? How many images can you get on a 128 gigabyte card?
2,000.
I was going to say 2,000 or 3,000, right? How many do you shoot in a day?
If I'm over 1,000,
It's a long day, right? So this is what I'll say to you is this. If you spend your entire day shooting to a single card and it fails, you're out. If you shoot to 32 gigabyte cards and you have to shoot 5 of them during the same day or 10 of them during the same day and one of them fails, you've lost 1/10 of your shooting, which is the smarter insurance policy. You guys are gambling. These big cards, nobody uses these big cards. Nobody. Again, they're selling you shit. And everybody thinks, oh yeah, bigger is better. And that's true for an internal hard drive in a laptop, but that's not true of an SD card, yes.
What SD card size would you recommend?
So for me, I use 32s and 64s. That's where I typically use, but I will mix mine up. I don't wait till I fill a 64 if I've got one. I will think about the day, if I've got to do 10 shots and I've got 5 cards, I'll do 2 shots on a card. Just to, again, it's built-in insurance. It doesn't cost you anything to swap a card out. And again, if one of your cards fails, there's a good chance that not all of your cards are going to fail. So you don't lose everything. And that's really the horror show, right? Is that, if I go to an art director and say, I'm sorry, I lost 2 of your outfits today, I'll make it up tomorrow, that's one thing. But if I say I've lost the whole day, we've got to book a whole nother day, that does not go over well. Make sense? Okay.
How often do they fail?
Cards? Every single card you've ever owned or ever will own will fail eventually, period. But that's true of every media. Every hard drive, if you believe the hard drive in your computer is going to last forever, nope. Nope. Not at all. We get into more those kind of questions kind of more towards the end of the semester. because it really does. There's a lot of people who have full-blown archives, right? I mean, they have just, computer, hard drive after hard drive after hard drive, whatever, storing all their stuff. You can't leave that stuff unplugged in. You've got to plug that thing in every 3 months, every 4 months to make sure that you preserve the integrity of the data on that. People lock that stuff away and don't look at it for years and then plug it in, and you can't get anything out of it because it's deteriorated. So that's the problem. They will all fail. But every media will fail. So people think that DVDs or CDs won't fail. They will. Eventually, tape fails. Everything fails. It's the biggest problem that the Library of Congress has right now, is that their majority of their collection now is digital, and they are frantic to keep it alive. Yeah. So anyway, moving on. So the next group that I'm in is the thing that looks like the little wrench. We just looked at the format card, so we've kind of gone through that. If we go to the next one over, I don't change anything in here except for the date and the time. This thing is critical, guys. The reason date and time matter, and the reason you want to make sure that these are set, and I actually set mine. I will whip out my iPhone, and well, here, I'm going to click on date and time. I'll whip out my iPhone, and I will actually get the second countdown, because it's coming off of some either server at Apple or server at NOAA or somebody, whatever. So you can get the exact seconds. The reason these things matter is, I'll just give you sort of an example. There's people who will shoot weddings in teams. So you'll have, one photographer who's doing like more overall views of the crowd, and then another photographer who's doing like portraits of the bride and the groom. They'll actually, and they're both shooting different cameras. And what happens is that they want to actually bring all of that material together, but in some sort of order that makes sense. So if their cameras are synced exactly to the very same second, when they import into, say, like you imported into a Lightroom catalog, or you import it into Capture One software, or you import it, whatever you import it into, it will actually mix those images from both cameras up based on time. So if one of you was shooting the bride and the groom's headshot at the exact moment that I shot the whole crowd, those images are going to be right next to each other in the group when they're imported. If mine are off by a minute, or God forbid, off by an hour or by a day, then there's no way to bring those two things back together. There's actually software designed specifically, I think, for wedding photographers to fix this problem if that ends up happening, because people can look and say, oh, my camera was 7 minutes and 38 seconds off. I need to go in and change the capture time by 7 minutes and 38 seconds on every single frame, so that when we put this all together, all the camera stuff together, everything is in the proper time order. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter what camera shot it. It just matters when it was shot. Does that sort of make sense? So anyway, date and time, critical. So anyway, just a word to the wise. I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to continue to knock my way over. Again, most of this is about video stuff right now, except sensor cleaning. There is a sensor cleaning thing that comes right down here. So hang on 1 second. I'm going to go get something really quickly. I'll be right back. This little thing right here is called a rocket. This should be a part of your assistant toolkit. This would also be a part of every camera case that you've actually got. This is what you use to clean sensors. So in cleaning a camera sensor, different manufacturers do them different ways, but most of the 35 millimeter people do it all the same way, and then the medium format people all do it the same way, and it's two different ways, but we'll talk about what that is. So anyway, I'm in the wrench part. I'm on the subframe number 3. Kind of in the middle is the sensor cleaning. If you come down to sensor cleaning and hit the set button, you can change how this camera works. So if you look at the very top of the menu item, it's that auto cleaning is enabled. That means every single time you turn your camera on, it does an auto clean, and every single time you turn it off, it also does an auto clean. Now the way auto clean works in all camera bodies is it shakes the sensor. So when you turn your camera on, you don't really feel it. You can maybe sort of hear it, but the sensor is actually being shaken back and forth to try to knock dust off of it. And then the same thing happens when you turn your camera off. So, and it works really pretty well for not a whole lot, not really, really bad dust, horrible dust. But If that doesn't, if you notice that there is dust on your lens, you can come down to the next item now, which is the Clean Now item. And if you click on the Clean Now item and then hit the Set button, you'll always hit the Set button to go into the next screen. It's going to come up and say Clean Sensor Now, and you can either cancel or say OK. I'm going to click on OK, or again, hit the Set button. And you'll hear, and you can actually feel your camera moving around in here, and it's trying to shake, it's doing a more violent shake of the sensor in here to actually clean it. And then the final version of this is, if that didn't work, again, I'm going to go back, it's Clean Manually. So you come down to Clean Manually, and when you click the Set button, you're going to hear something happen. I'm going to actually show you what happens in real time. So I'm going to take the lens cover, the entire lens off of this camera. And you'll see on the inside of this camera right now, there is the mirror right here. So this is the mirror that actually, light comes in, hits the mirror, goes up into the housing, and that's what you see. This mirror needs to go out of the way in order for the light to actually hit the sensor that's underneath it. For us to clean this thing manually, we need that mirror out of the way. So that's the first move. If you pick Clean Manually, and I'm going to push the Set button, but I'm going to turn it over so you can actually watch this really happen. I'm going to hit the Set button, and you'll see the mirror pop up. Or you should see the mirror pop up. Sorry. So the mirror's popped up now, and now I can actually see, I can get to the sensor. So you know the old saying about, and right now, while I'm having this conversation, whenever you get this thing open like this thing is really vulnerable to everything, right? Keep it turned down until you actually need to use it. Always keep this thing turned down. That way dust can't fall into it. Only things can fall out of it. So the old saying about what you put in your ear, nothing smaller than your elbow, it kind of holds true here as well. There are all sorts of cleaning things that are designed to go in here. There's things that are, they look like sponges on a stick. There's things that look like Q-tips. There's things that look like all of this stuff. If you have a problem on your sensor that is bad enough to require that, do not touch it. Send it into a lab, have it professionally cleaned. Do not go in there and try to clean it. You will fuck up. The thing is, it's not really the sensor. It's actually, there's a filter on top of the sensor here, and that's what you're really cleaning. But if you scratch it, you might as well throw your camera away. Just saying. If you go in there with a really wet Q-tip and there's a lot of liquid and it actually soaks into the electronics around this, you fry your camera. I mean, there's all sorts of problems that you can get into this. Yes? So in mirrorless, you don't need to worry about this at all, because again, the sensor can get exposed, and you would clean it the way I'm going to show you how to clean this guy, and it's the same way that you do for the digital backs. So we'll take a look at the digital backs as well. Again, in the digital backs, these are designed to be actually, you put cleaning liquid on them and drag it across the surface. Every single time I do it, I'm terrified. But anyway, I would do this other method first. So for these cameras, what you do instead is you grab your rocket like this, and what you're trying to do, when you go in on this, you want to go in enough, but you don't want this thing to actually hit the sensor. But you go in and you just start doing this as much as you can. You do this until your hand can't do this anymore. Some people will actually try to do this upside down. I don't know that that ever has really helped me, but you keep doing this and it seems like this is taking forever, and it is taking forever, but that's the only way you're going to actually get this thing clean. And then finally, when that's all done, again, keep the camera tilted down, put the lens back on. And then to get the mirror to come back down, you have to turn the camera off. And you'll hear the mirror drop back down. And you can see here, if I pull this off, that the mirror again is down. Questions about any of this stuff so far? Are we good? Okay, I'm going to get through this camera and we'll take a quick break. So again, turn the camera back on. I should still be in the same menu place where we were doing the sensor cleaning part. So we're going to move on to the next one, and it's HDMI frame rates. And again, I don't care about that. But the next part that I hit here is something that I do truly care about. And this, to me, is what you should be looking for in every single camera and every single setup. It's this clear all camera settings. If you click on this, it'll actually say, again, it'll give you the option. I clicked on the set button to do that. It'll give you the option to either cancel it or say, okay. I'm going to use the scroll wheel to go over to okay, hit the set button again. And it has now gone in and it has reset my camera to its defaults. And the advantage of this is that there's so many menus in here. Do you really want to do what we just did and go through every single one of those menus to set this camera up? No, you do not. So we reset this to its defaults, but there's a major issue with this. I need everybody to go back to the original screen, the one where we set this thing up to be camera raw. So back to the far left icon, the red one, and the first subframe, and look at your image quality and tell me what you see. Did everybody reset their cameras to their defaults? What is your image quality setting? It is now a JPEG. Remember, I just set this thing to RAW. The default setting for image quality in a Canon camera is to shoot JPEG, not RAW. So even though resetting it was a smart move, there are certain things in here that got fucked up. And this is one of them right here. So we need to fix that. So just knowing that this is my move when I do this. I clean the eyepiece. I go in here, I immediately set this camera to its defaults, return it to its defaults, and then I immediately come into my image quality and I reset this to be RAW without a JPEG. So that gets me back to a base state that I want to work with. Now we're going to finish tricking this out in just a second and then we'll take a break. So if I go all the way back to where I was before, I just want to point out a couple things. So I'm back at the clear all camera settings. If we go to the next one, which is this little brown camera, it's another version of it. This is where you can set the exposure level increments. So some people will do these. This is set up to shoot in thirds of a stop, but a lot of people prefer to shoot in half stops. For me, I like to set my camera up so that I can do both really quickly. So if you take a look on the very top of your camera, you will see this is actually set to manual right now, but up above manual, I've got a C1, a C2, and a C3. Those are custom settings for your camera. They're just collections. They are settings that you use, that you make. So the reason I use these is that there are times, especially if you're shooting available light, where you're metering something out and it says you need to shoot at 8.5. But your camera is set up to shoot into thirds. So does that 8.5, does that mean you shoot at 8 1/3, which is slightly overexposed, or 8 2/3, which is slightly underexposed? Which do you pick? I don't have to. In my setup here, my cameras are set up exactly. The only thing I changed from C1 to C2 is C1 is thirds of a stop increments are used by this camera. C2 is set up to do half stops. So we can set it up that way. I'm still on memory 1 right now. And we'll come in here. And right now it's set up to third, the exposure to third stops. Again, if I click on this, you can see I can go down to half stop increments and click OK. And then whatever you have set up, you get your camera completely tricked out and set up. Then you say, I want to assign those settings to C1 or C2 or C3. There's 3 possible ones. And it will remember those settings for you. So it's just a really good way, quick way to go back and forth. So again, the same thing with ISO settings. You can do them in third stops. I pretty much keep those the way it is. And then if we go to the next one, I don't need to set my speed range. The next one, and this one matters. So the last one that's on this page, no, it's not the last one. It's the subframe number 3. You'll see at the very bottom it says custom controls. If you come down to custom controls and click on this, this is one thing that is not reset when you reset this camera to its default. These things stay exactly the way they're set up to do. However, in this case, my camera, yours may be set up differently here. what you see on these things is that these are a series of buttons. So this very top one is your shutter button. The one underneath it is the autofocus on-off button. That's this button right here. You can see that AF on. It's the second one down. There's a whole series of buttons. There's another, this little star button right here is also the next one down. You can set these things up to control different things. So if we take the shutter release button, the one that's at the very top, and you press the set button, you can see that a shutter button half press starts autofocus. There's also, so autofocus and metering both. That's what that little icon in the back is. So it's an autofocus and a meter. The one next to it is meter only, and then the one next to it is whatever has been assigned to this little star button right here. So the reason I point this out is that there are a lot of people who prefer not to have the shutter button do autofocus. So again, everybody look up at me right now. I'll show you how I shoot basically. So I'm a fashion shooter, and everybody know, well, if you don't know, you should know. When you're shooting people, the only thing that matters to have in focus is the eyes. If the eyes are in focus, the image is in focus. If the eyes are out of focus, the image is out of focus. It doesn't matter. Again, I shoot fashion. I'm not really shooting faces. When I do beauty, I shoot faces, but I'm doing primarily fashion. The clothes can be tack sharp, but if that face is soft, people will just say the image is out of focus. The eyes can be sharp, and the actual outfit that we shoot can be soft, and people will say, well, okay, that's in focus. I mean, that's just the way human nature is. So I'm just going to throw that part out to you. So the eyes need to be tacked. So for me, what I typically do is I'm going to change how this works. I'll show you. Well, this would be the, if I leave it at its default, the way it's set up is I do this. So if I am actually framing here, typically I shoot low, so I'm going to show you over here. Again, you won't see this on the video, but you'll hear part of it. This is how I typically shoot. I like to get low and shoot up. I am a big believer in hero poses for people, whatever. So this is my vantage point. So what I'm constantly doing when I'm using autofocus is I pull up and I do an autofocus at their face. I keep my hand lightly pressed on the shutter release button and then come back down and shoot the picture. And then I have to do it all over again. So I'm up to the face, reframe, shoot. Up to the face, focus, reframe, shoot. Up to the face, refocus, come back. That is really annoying. So instead, what I do, and this again, most of you, when you see this trick, if you start working this way, you will love this. But most of the pros that I know, this is also how they shoot. It's not so much for people who are doing like sports stuff. They wouldn't do this, or and when I say sports, a big swath of that. People who shoot like horse racing, that kind of stuff, they don't do this sort of stuff. But for us, people who work in the studio use this all the time. Instead, what we're going to do is I'm going to go into my custom controls. I'm going to go to this autofocus, to my shutter release button first. I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to change it to be start meter only. So now when I do that and hit set, my shutter release now will not do autofocus. It'll actually turn the meter on, but I don't care. I never use the meter inside my camera, so I don't really care about that. It's basically just to, it's not to turn metering on that I care about. It's to stop this button from doing autofocus. Then on the next button down, which is the AF on button, so if I scroll down for that and click on that, this is set up to do autofocus as well as turn meter on. So I'm going to go ahead and save that as that, and then you'll see this is my AF button right here. I keep my thumb on the AF button and my finger on the shutter button, and then this is how I shoot. So with this set up like this now, my thumb is on the autofocus button. I raise up to their face. I autofocus using my thumb, and then reframe, fire 1, 2, 3, 4. Back up, reframe, and back up to the face and autofocus. 1, 2, 3, 4. Back up, reframe. So I get a whole, I'm not going up and down, up and down, up and down for every single frame. I do 3 or 4 of them, and then as people are moving around, I recheck my focus. So it's just a much easier, and pretty much every camera in the world is set up to function like this. Most, all modern cameras, there's a variation on this somehow to actually do this. However, this is not reset when you actually reset the camera to its default. So if we go back to that original, not these custom controls, but back to the original clear all camera settings, that does not change the habit of these shutter buttons right here. So all of a sudden, if you've got a camera that is not focusing, because somebody says, well, I got autofocus on, it should be focusing, and it's not focusing, this is the first thing that you go in and check. Make sense? Okay, the next piece over, actually, not the next piece over. So that's custom camera controls. The next part over is all about cropping and IPC, but the last one here is about all custom functions. So the custom functions in here are these functions that are sitting up here at the top. That's what you're clearing out here. So they're the user functions. So we're not going to get to that part right now. I'm just going to show you how to finish setting up the rest of this camera. There's only the last couple of things that we actually need to set up in here. And so the first one is, if I can get to it here, let me just check really quick. So if you take a look on your camera here, up by the shutter button, there's a button right here that says M-FN. Can everybody see that? That is, we're going to use that button to adjust the pattern that we actually use for our focus points. But this thing on the back right here, this thing right here, there's a, it looks like a sort of a square with a set of little dots in it. This is your focusing pattern. So if you press this button in and look through your camera, you should see a grid. I don't know if I can show you mine. Actually, it may be showing on the back. Sometimes you'll see the same grid on the back. Mine's not showing on the back. But if I put it on here, I don't think you can see. You can't really see. But anyway, if you look through your camera, you should see a series of blinking red lights. You may have to tap your focus a little bit, but it's actually got a set, mine's got a series of blinking red lights, and there's a grid that's on the inside of your camera. Can everybody find that? While you're seeing the grid, you need to put your finger on this memory function button, and you need to press it, and you will see it actually outlines a different set of focusing points. So when I press mine the very first time, it does a 4 square around the very center of my camera. If I press it again, it does a 9 square around my camera. If I press it again, it does it adds the center point to it. If I press it again, it does a bracket around the entire center group column. If I press it again, it goes out to a completely open parentheses around the entire camera. If you leave your camera at this stage of the game where you're seeing just the parentheses around it, what your camera is going to do is that Canon is going to pick the points for you every single time you shoot. Sometimes this can be a really good strategy, sometimes not such a good strategy. But you'll see if you actually do a focus, you'll actually see the points will show up that it's actually using. Like I'm focusing on you guys right now, and it's actually giving me points along the very bottom. It picks your own points for you. Sometimes if it's a really fast, crazy, action-y kind of shoot, this is the best way to actually have your camera set up. However, in most cases, this is not. So again, if you hold down that same thing again in the back button right here, the back button that's right below the square, and you push on this menu button, you will get, again, it'll get you back to the very beginning where there is, you see the whole series of points in here, and there's one that's actually got a little outline around it in the very center. Can you guys all see that part? I'll walk you through this. If you take then your wheel, the wheel that's right by your shutter release, and you start to scroll, you will see that you can actually change that point so that it goes all the way to the left, or it goes all the way to the right. If you actually use the button that's underneath it, the scroll wheel that's on the bottom, you can actually take that, that point that's actually outlined either up or down in your camera. So a lot of people use this. A lot of people do this. I shoot 99% of what I shoot is vertical. I shoot like this. I don't shoot horizontals hardly ever. I shoot like this. So a lot of people think, well, that's perfect and what you should do, because again, I've got that I person thing going on. So what a lot of people will do is they'll actually push this down, and then they'll push the button that gives me the dot so that I can change my focus point. Again, the square right here, you press that, and then you take the wheel by your shutter release and you pop it up to the very top focus point that's at the very top. And now when I'm actually framing, my focus point is sitting up at the very top, right? And you would think, well, that's perfect. That would make my life so much easier. I don't need to do this flipping up and down part. However, and this is the last thing I'm going to lead you with this right now, guys, and then we'll take a quick break. So this is what I was looking for that I wanted to show everyone. So if you remember what you were just looking at, all those red lights that are sitting inside of your camera, those are individual focus points. And you remember, I said if I could turn my screen, I may be screwing this up right now in a horrible way, but let's see. Right, that I could actually set this, again, I'm shooting vertical now, right? That I could set this point right up here to actually be, roughly on the face of the figure that I'm shooting for fashion, and then this is the whole body part, and wouldn't that be great? Let's see if I can undo that part. Nope. But there is a problem with that, and this is the problem. Not all of these focus points are created equal. So you will notice here that in this point right here, there is a sort of a vertical bar that's going down along all of this. And then on these that are right next to it, there's actually a horizontal strip that goes across these. Some of these have both. So these only have the vertical bar that's going across it. This only has the vertical bar going across it. This is cross, so you get vertical and horizontal. This is not. This is only vertical. This is only vertical. And then you get into this really insane thing that's here in the middle. So you have here vertical and horizontal points down here, also on the top over here as well. And then what you can't really see, because it's a jumble here, I'll see if I can zoom in enough of this for this to actually make some sense. You can see that here, the ones in the middle, they not only have vertical, they have horizontal, but then they've got these two angled ones as well. So to explain what that really is, I've got to zoom back out for a second. This is the different kinds of focusing points that exist inside what we're really looking at. So what you need to understand is how focusing actually works in autofocus. So what happens is if you have a horizontal, I'm going to start here with the most normal of them of all. So it's going to be this group right here. So in most cases, people who develop 35 millimeter cameras believe that they should be shot horizontally. These are really designed to be shot like this. And so everything in this camera that is done, they expect this to be the majority of how people shoot. And so they favor shooting in this orientation. The problem with it is this. In order to, you're not going to see this on the screen, you will hear it. I'm going to go to the whiteboard really quickly. But what happens in life, for the most part, is so typically in the real world, we have people, a lot of people, we have trees, we have buildings, we have all this vertical stuff. And the way autofocusing works is it looks for edges, and then it sees if there's an abrupt jump in that edge. It's looking for a loss of contrast in that edge. So what would happen, imagine this, if this is the side of that building right here, imagine instead of it looking like this, it looked like this. And there was a break here in the middle. So what these focus points do, the horizontal ones, those ones that are this top group that's right here, what they do is they cross, they look for edges that they can cross, and they cross them like this. So these are set up horizontal to look for that edge disruption in something that's vertical. Does that make sense? So instead of seeing this line like this, what they would see, it would be, the line would look like this. And it knows that that's wrong. So the autofocusing mechanism pushes this over so that, again, at the end of the day, you get that. Does that make sense? That's how they work. So these horizontal focusing points are designed to actually look for vertical lines to do this to. Because if you have a horizontal line for one of these instead, the line goes through this. There's nothing in there to get broken. So it can't focus on horizontal lines. That's why they have these. These are just the opposite. So these cannot focus on vertical lines. There's no reason you would use these. The vertical lines would pass right through them. So again, my tree right here, this is my focus point right here, the tree is going through this. There's nothing to be offset for it to know it's out of focus. Does that make sense to everyone what's going on here? So you have these two kinds of points. You have ones, the focusing points that primarily are designed to focus on horizontal lines, others that are primarily designed to focus on vertical lines. So that's what's going on here. However, there are special cases, and in the case of these up here, let me show you this one. I think there's one more down here. Nope. So these are designed to focus on vertical things, this bar that's going across. This is designed to focus on a horizontal thing because it will break through. But when I rotate this thing, they completely change which ones they actually do. So if I rotate this thing to shoot the way that I shoot, like this, then the ones that were vertical are now horizontal points here. And so this is the problem that I'm running into in terms of the ones that I picked. This point that's on the very edge of this is only a focus in a single direction. And if it's not got a vertical line that it will break, it can't focus. So if I set my focus point to be that, and I'm trying to shoot fashion figures with this, again, fashion figures are not going to actually be picked up by this part right here. So if I go back and take a look at the holy grail of them all, it's these 4 or 5 right in the middle. What these have right in here is they not only have a focusing point for horizontal and vertical, they've got 2 cross points as well to go on the diagonals. So these 5 points that are in the middle beat everyone out. They are the superior focusing points. Nothing can touch this stuff. Nothing gets close to this stuff. So all of you people who are actually resetting your stuff feeling like these are all equal players, they are not. These cross points that are these 2 rows are superior to the single lines. The ones that are in the middle are also cross points, but these 5 that are right in the middle grab focus it's like in any line, in any direction, will get picked up by those in the middle. So when you get frustrated with your focusing, when you're working for a photographer and he's frustrated and he cannot get it to focus, you want to set your camera up to really utilize this stuff that's right here in the middle. You can get a single row of this, but even better, that 5 square, or the 9 square around with the 1 in the middle will give you the most superior focusing that you can get out of these cameras. So if you turn on your camera again, and you pick it up, and you again push the, hang on, let me show you. And again, you push this button on the back that's got next to that little square so that I can see my focus point layout. You click on that, and you bring, in my case, I've got to bring my focus point. I've got just a single one going back to the center. And then again, press on this MFN button up by your shutter release to change the pattern. You will see it'll go, the center part will go off, then you'll get a 4 square with the center off, then you'll get a 9 square, a 3 by 3, and then you click it one last time, and you should get all 9, so you've got 3 across, 3 in the middle, and 3 underneath across. So basically what I'm getting is these 3, so this is the middle one. I'm getting these 3 right here, these 3 right here, and these 3 right here. It will change everything about your focus. You need to realize, though, that now that you need to put the center part of your camera on what you want to be sharp. But you've got the best points to do it, no matter what the orientation that you're trying to focus on is. And then again, if you're using that rear focus button as your focus and you take it off of your shutter release, you do a quick focus, bang, 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 and you are good to go. It will change everything. Yes? So you need to look, this pattern will lay out, this is exactly the same pattern that they use in a 5D Mark III. It has changed if you have an R series camera, a mirrorless version. This, you have to look up what their focus setup is. In an ideal world, every single one of these points would be one of those, it's more than dual cross, it's like triple cross points. The ones here where you've got horizontal and vertical, these are called dual cross points. But the ones that are in the middle right here, that's what they're calling dual cross. This is actually, this is like quad cross to me, right? Because you've got horizontal, vertical, and then 2 diagonals on every single point there. Every point should be set up like this, and then you would be able to actually move your stuff around and really be able to not have to be so reorienting with your focusing. But it's prohibitively expensive, apparently. Or at least it is in this version. Check your manual, because again, I know that, how many people in here are Canon shooters? How many are Nikon? Sony? Yeah, so just check your camera. Everybody, a manual will have a version of this. Yes? So it's these 3 at the very top, 1, 2, 3 across, 1, 2, 3 in the middle, and then 1, 2, 3 underneath it. It's that 9 square. So I call it a 9 square because it's 3 by 3. There are 9 points in there. Wait, what?
No, I know there's like the grid that's like the 9 square.
Right. Right, but the ones that are in the middle are the most important ones, so you definitely want to add that one that's in the center to make it the 9, the full 9. Yeah. And then again, you don't want to push this off to one side because you can take that 9 square and again use your control wheels to move it out here so that you have a 9 square out here or a 9 square over here or one down here in the corner, whatever. You want to stay away from that part. So those are my 2 strategies for focus. Either really dedicate the ones that really matter to this, the ones that are the best, or if you're just in a situation where it is just like bedlam, right? And you're just having to be quick focus, whatever, you don't really have time to plan on that, then set it so that you have just the parameter around this, the outline of this entire area where Canon actually picks the focus points for you. Because what it's doing is it's going to look for the, it won't always be right, but it's going to look for the things that have the most contrast that will actually give you that information. So Liam brought up something that's really interesting though, because now there's a lot of modern cameras that now enable software tricks like eye tracking for focus. So you can focus on a face and then that face can run all over the place and you have to test that out. It's just a question of how good is that software. What I can say to you is that predictive focus on all these cameras has been promised for years. So what predictive focus does is that if you imagine somebody running straight towards you, you're shooting pictures of them and you're having them run right at you. What predictive focus does when you put it on is that it gauges the speed of the person as they are moving towards you, and it tries to preset the focus closer to your camera, knowing that when you hit the button, they will indeed be closer to you. And some of them work pretty well. Again, Sony tends to really have probably the most advanced focusing on the market, although Canon has really come up close. And most of Nikon is actually built by Sony, so Nikon probably has inherited a lot of the same sort of focusing quality that Sony's actually have. So anyway, are there questions about any of this stuff? Are we good on this? Okay. Last thing I'll say about this, again, in thinking about your checklist, this got brought up earlier, is that you should actually be checking your lenses. So when you pop this lens off, you actually want to tilt it so that you can see the reflection of the surface of the lens. If you just look at your lens straight on, here, let me go back to this. If you just look at your lens straight on like that, you can't tell if there's something on the edge, on the surface of the glass. But if you tilt it to the side like this, you can see the surface of the glass, and you'd be looking for fingerprints, thumbprints, all of that kind of stuff. If you see them, do not breathe on this. Your breath is full of really nasty shit, and you do not want to put that on a glass lens. Microfiber cloth is your best friend. That's what I would go after. There is lens cleaning liquid and tissues. Very few people use that stuff anymore. The reason that you want to maybe stick with the microfiber stuff and not do, again, you'll notice I'm cradling this down because that lens is off of it, is that these lenses have got micro coatings on them. They have coatings on them that are like a billionth of an inch thick. I mean, and the worry about actually using an abrasive on this, so a liquid and then an actual lens tissue on this, you actually can wear the coating off the lens, and it's an anti-reflection coating. It's why you can actually, if you use older series lenses and you've got backlighting, and there's any sort of backlighting and all, those lenses will flare like crazy. These actually do a pretty good job of mitigating flare. They're not perfect, but they do a relatively good job of it. But that's all because of the coatings that are on the front and the back of these lenses. So you want to be careful about those. Again, so a microfiber cloth is the best thing that you can use on this. Do not ever, this goes for your regular glasses as well, don't ever touch this with a Kleenex. Don't ever touch this with anything that isn't pure cotton. If you have to do it, you need to make sure that your t-shirt actually is pure cotton, that it doesn't have nylon or spandex in it. All of those will actually etch this lens. They'll scratch this lens. So you see somebody breathing onto a lens and then rubbing it with their t-shirt, run. That is not somebody you want to work for. Make sense? Okay. So other than that, we're pretty good on here. We'll get back to cameras in a big way. Before we actually change up, though, I want to go through the same process using the medium format cameras. So if you can put your 35 millimeter camera away, I'm going to pause this video really quickly. And then bring it back over here. We'll check it back in. And I want everybody to grab one of the medium format cameras. I think there's only 7 of them, so we need to team up a little bit closer. I know there are 3 people to a team instead of only 2, but this should be the only thing that we have to do that on. So just get close to somebody. Okay, so we're going to go over medium format really quickly. Has anybody in here not worked with these cameras? Okay, no, that's fine. Again, this is going to be your checkout. So the beauty of that is that you'll be able to work with these things from now on if you're interested in doing it. I'll go over the pluses and minuses of this camera really quickly, and then we'll sort of like go from there. So to start off, to begin with, whatever, you can see this has got a lens on it. There's a lens shade that's sitting on it backwards. You just roll that part off. These little dots that are on lens shades, these actually matter quite a bit, how you put them on and off. Most of them have 2 dots, so you'll see there's a little white dot here. There's also a little white dot on the lens, and if you line these up, I'm going to take the lens cap off. If you line these up, they should screw on, and it'll give you the meal be up and all that part. But when you want to put this upside down and put this in, there's usually a second white dot that'll be somewhere on the inside of this. It's not the one on the outside, but it'll be one on the inside. This doesn't seem to have one on it, but other ones will. So again, this one's actually now on upside down, but that part doesn't really matter as far as that goes. But the reason the dot matters is that there are lens shades that are made that are not circular. There's ones that are made that are more rectangular. And if you have them oriented on your camera incorrectly, then the short edge of the lens shade will be on the long edge of your image, and it'll actually vignette. Phoebe. Yes.
Sorry, I was wondering if the case itself, even like these openings that have a duct tape on them,
Yes.
is it just like extra?
No, it's not extra protection. So the ones that have the duct tape on inside the case, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, it's meant to have people not put batteries back into the case. So it forces you not to, again, they were originally, that's where they kept batteries. That's also where they kept lens cleaning stuff, sensor cleaning stuff. And they don't want people to use that stuff. They want those to keep, they want to keep them out of the case. So that's why they put duct tape over it. Exactly. Yeah, again, most of the time, and
Sorry.
no, go for it.
Whoever had 14, did you have the lens cap?
Anybody got a lens cap for a camera?
Thank you.
And then Amanda, we don't put medium format away with batteries in them, correct?
No, if you
When we
can't-
check them out, you guys put them in, correct?
At least the battery group, because some of them are broken.
Yeah. So yeah, they were just asking about it. So yeah, batteries don't go back into any cases, the 35 millimeter or the other. Yeah. So they're in the camera right now. When you check these back in, they will pull them out. Yeah. Okay. So starting with this camera, I'm going to start at the very top part right here. This is where the shutter release button is, and you can see it's set to L. Actually, we should talk about batteries first. So before we get to this shutter release area right here, we're going to look at the bottom of this camera. So on the bottom of the camera and the handle right here, this is where one of the batteries goes. There's two batteries in this camera system. This one you can see it's a little, this is probably why they put them in here. People managed to actually break these, this is the little lock that'll open and close this thing. And I don't even think I can get this out. Yeah, I can't even get this out. So at any rate, yep, so with a pen I can. So this is the battery. There's two kinds of batteries that will actually fit in this. There are these, which is a rechargeable battery. And again, the second you check this camera out, they're really good about keeping these things charged. That's why they don't let people put these stuff back in the case. So when you get a battery from them, it should be charged. But if you're doing this on your own, you definitely want to start charging this thing right away. So anyway, this is one set. There's another version of this that takes AAAs, exactly that version right there, that takes, not AAAs, AA batteries, also rechargeable ones. But at any rate, you'll have one or the other. This goes back in, and then it closes like that. That's one battery. There's a second battery that works just for the digital back, and it's sitting here in the back, and there's a little catch release on this. You pop this, and then you can open up this tab, and then if you look at the very top area right in here, you'll see there's a little white tab right here. That's what's holding the battery in. If you want to change it, you push that little tab in, the battery will pop up, out a little bit, and then you can actually pull it out. So these batteries are designed in a specific way. You can't put these in the wrong way, so you'll notice I'm going to turn this around and try to put it in, and it simply won't fit. It won't go in. And certainly, if you do the square edges on the curved edges, whatever, it won't go in. These are the contacts for the battery are right here, and that's what actually goes in. So again, you have to charge these things as well. When you throw that battery in, it's going to turn the camera back on. We don't need this camera back on right now, so to turn this thing off, if I turn my camera all the way around, you'll notice on the camera back here, there's an on-off switch right here. Just press and hold that until the LED screen on the back goes out. And then we're going to go to the front of the camera. So we've got batteries in now. So the front of the camera, this is actually how you turn the camera on, but this is also sets up different ways that your shutter functions. So the L that's sitting at the very bottom is for lock. So here, does that make more sense? Yeah, so that's for lock. The second method, so there's a collar that goes around this. You just push the collar so that the little white dot is next to S. That stands for single shot. So basically that means that every single time you want the camera to fire, you have to push the shutter button. So you have to push it, let go, push it, let go, push it, let go, push it, let go, push it, let go. That's how that one works. The C, which is the next one, is continuous. That means you can just put your finger down on the shutter button, hold it down, and your camera will repeatedly fire as fast as it can. And then there's finally this MUP. Anybody have any idea what that is? You have these on your cameras as well.
Manual?
Say what?
I thought it was like manual.
No, it stands for mirror lockup. So what mirror lockup does is that when you are shooting something, two ways to think about this. If you are shooting super macro, so you are in really tight, you're like 1-to-1 on something. So a quarter that you would shoot would actually show up as a quarter size on your sensor. You're in really, really tight. What happens there is that this camera, like that 35mm camera that I showed you, has a mirror inside of it. So again, light comes into the lens, it hits the mirror, goes up into this housing and out the back for you to focus. But for you to take a picture, that mirror has to flop up out of the way so that the light goes through the lens all the way back and hits the sensor. That mirror movement can cause vibration in your camera, and if you are in super macro, it'll introduce motion into your capture, so your image will be soft. So what mirror lockup does when you set it, when you hit mirror lockup, the first time you hit the shutter, the mirror goes up, but you do not take a picture. Then you count to 5, you let your camera stabilize, and then you hit the shutter button a second time, and it takes the picture, and then the mirror returns back down. Now you'll notice that there is a threaded hole in the end of this shutter release button. Most people, if you're going to do mirror lockup work, you either want to have an electronic remote control to fire your camera, or you want to use a cable release for this, because you defeat the whole purpose of having mirror lockup by coming in here and actually pushing this button again with your hand, because your hand will then introduce vibration. So macro work this matters for, but also incredibly distant work this matters for. So if you hook this camera up to a telescope, you definitely want to be using mirror lockup, because otherwise you'll introduce vibration, and something that is 1,000,000 miles away, the small, half a millimeter vibration at your camera turns into being thousands and thousands of miles when you get 1,000,000 miles away. Make sense? Questions about that part? So it's important to note this, though. There's a difference, and this is also true of most, if not all, cameras. The difference in S and C is not just how quickly your shutter will fire. It's also what autofocus will do. So when you are on S and you try to use autofocus on this camera, if the camera does not believe you're in focus, it will not let this shutter release. The camera has to believe that you are in focus, no matter what. When you're on C, the camera will say, okay, well, hopefully you're in focus, but if you're not, we're still going to take the picture. This is also where you get into predictive focus. So if you put it on C and you've got somebody running towards you, it's going to try to anticipate the speed at which they are coming towards you, and then pre-focus closer to the camera so that when the shutter actually does fire, the person is where they should be and is in focus. Again, all of these systems, it's a lot of promise. You would have to check this out to really see if that part works. If you're going to do more predictive focus, it's easier to actually do marks on a floor and have somebody hit a mark the same place every single time, pre-focus to that mark, and then shoot it in manual focus. Don't try to use autofocus and all this stuff. So at any rate, I'm going to put mine back to S, because again, I'm going to do single shot. Then if we look on the front of the camera, there's some settings there that matter here as well. So the ones that are on the very front of the camera that look like this, it's a little wheel that's on the front. There's an M, an S, and a C. These are autofocus strategies. So the S and the C back here are for shutter. So again, single shot, continuous shot. But the S and C here are again for that focus that I was talking about. You would actually set this up. So when you set it to M, that means manual focus. When you set it to S, that's going to be when you use single shot S here. And then this C would be continuous. And again, in continuous, if you use the continuous focus here, then the camera will fire even if it does not believe you are in focus. But it will try to predict the focus for you. So the only way to actually know if this is ever really working for you or not is to look at it on screen. You got to be tethered and you got to see, yeah, is that working? That person's running at me. Nope, they're really soft. Let's change our strategy. Let's see how we can do this differently. Make sense? Yes. I'm sorry?
Those are the focus.
Yeah, so this is all focused down on the bottom. This is all shutter up here on the top. But you would put these two together. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to leave mine on S for single shot. On this camera, you also have to set autofocus on the lens. There's a lot of lenses that work like this. The 70 to 200 millimeter Canon lenses that we typically use don't, but the longer 200 series, the 70 to 200 series, whatever, there is an autofocus switch on the lens as well. Anyway, on this lens, you'll see there's an MF and an AF. So if you want to use autofocus on this, you have to put this on AF, you have to put this on S, and you have to put this on S. If you want it to be manual focus, you put this on MF, you put this on M, and then it doesn't matter what you're using on your shutter. If you want that predictive focus, you put it on C. Again, you would use C here as well, and then back to autofocus here as well. Make sense? All right. I am going to leave this on autofocus. I'm going to go back to single shot, and I'm going to go back to single shot on here as well. There's another button down here that exists right down in here. Now, the change here is going to depend on what we have set up in our aperture right here. So I've got my camera that's actually turned on. If you look at the LED screen that's sitting right up here, right above the shutter release button, you'll have a shutter speed at the top, you'll have an aperture next to that, and then you've got a couple of different metering setups. Again, I don't use the in-camera meter in this, so it doesn't matter. Some of this is set up to be spot. It can be set up to be an average meter. I don't really care about those parts right here. There is a battery indicator right here. If you tap this again, it'll come on again. If you use the control wheel up at the top and change this, this changes your shutter speeds. If you use the control wheel at the back right here, this actually changes your aperture. So I'm going to actually ask you to stop this down to F16 so that you can see what the next control does on this. So the next control that does this is this little button right down here. And if you click on this little button right down here, you might be able to see this on screen. Hang on one second. You can't see it. You should be, oh, there you go. You can see it there. What it does is that it actually stops this lens down to the aperture in the case I set it to F16. So what you need to know about all of these cameras, these are all automatic lenses. They all stay wide open for you to focus for two reasons. Number one, you have the least depth of field, and number two, you have the most light. So your screen's going to be the brightest, and you have the least depth of field, so your focusing is more exact. But there's a lot of people who actually need to see what will be in focus when you do stop down, and that's what this mirror, so what this is about is this is actually will stop your camera down. So if you look through your camera and push that button in, you will see that your camera gets really dark because we've just stopped down from F4 to F16, but then you get a true view of the depth of field of this camera. So you can truly see what will be in focus and what will not be in focus. This is especially important for people who are doing still life work. Because again, you can stop down and so you can see exactly, if you are struggling with getting your depth of field in the right spot, and you need to sort of hit that sweet spot. So while we're on that subject, again, you won't see this on the video. Hopefully you'll hear it on the screen. Okay, so let's say, for instance, that I want to, this is what I'm going to photograph, it's my computer. This top right here. So this is the area that I want to be. So I need the front to be in focus, and I need the back to be in focus. Does that make sense to everybody, what's going on here? So what I do is I take pieces of print. This is the easiest way to actually set focus. And I try to gauge basically what is a third of the way in, and it's probably right about here, right? So it's hard for you to see it because there's glare on this, but this is, it's a piece of newsprint that looks like that, and it's very easy to focus on and to read. So again, if you put this down like this and you can focus right on that, you can see you can focus on those letters. But I would focus on this. So again, I'm cheating my focus. I'm not putting it in the middle, I'm putting it towards the front. So that because the back is further away, it carries focus. It has the appearance of being more in focus than the front edge does. So that's why you cheat it towards the front side of it. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. Moving on. So we've gone through this whole part and the front part, this. So as we get up to the top now, hold on one second, let me bring this down closer. So as we come down to this part down here now, again, the wheel that goes around here is pretty typical of most of the wheels. So this is the mode that you're actually going to shoot in. You'll see that there's a red X on this. This is actually to shoot at sync speed for the camera. So if you're using strobe, basically what this does is it sets this camera to be 125th. That's the sync speed of this camera. We can't shoot faster than 125th, or you get that dreaded black line in the studio. If you don't know what sync speed is, don't worry. We get into sync speed next week in a big way, so you'll know what it is after that. M stands for manual. That lets you control everything. You set the ISO, you set the shutter speed, and the apertures here, you set everything. If we go to T, this actually, what these are priorities. So in T, what you do is you actually set the aperture, and the camera figures out the best shutter speed for you. If you go to A, this is aperture priority, which means that the aperture is fixed, but then it'll pick the shutter speed for you. If you go to P, what P does, it tries to do both. It tries to figure out the best shutter speed for you as well as the best aperture. A lot of what it'll do when it's doing that is it will look at the lens that you actually have and the focus distance that you're using, and imagine that you're trying to hand hold this thing. And if you're trying to hand hold this thing, what sort of shutter speed should you have? And then in turn, what aperture should you have? So I've got an 80 millimeter lens on here. If you take a look, it says that right here, 80 millimeter lens. What shutter speed minimum do I need to hand hold this camera? Anybody else? 1 over the focal length of the lens is where you should be to hand hold a lens. So for an 80 millimeter, that would actually probably be 125th, because 60th is my other option if you're using whole shutter speeds. So a 60th is not quite fast enough to hand hold an 80 millimeter lens. If you go to a 200 millimeter lens, then you would want your minimum shutter speed should be a 250th of a second. If you want to hand hold a 500 millimeter lens, which is a big ass lens, but you can do it, you would want to be a minimum of 500th of a second. It's always 1 over the focal length is the minimum that you should be using to hand hold anything. Now again, camera manufacturers have gotten very smart and very clever about introducing there's 2 ways that you can do this to actually aid in your ability to hold at a slower speed. There's 2 systems that counteract motion when you're hand holding a camera. One actually shifts the elements of the lens. So everybody take a look at me really quickly. If for some reason I'm shooting like this, and by accident I have a motion, just as I put it up to I just move the camera this way, just trying to hold it, right? I make a motion like this. What happens is that if I pan my camera up like that by mistake, then my image actually goes down, right? So I'm going, like if I have this perfectly framed so it's at the very top of someone's head, and I go up like this, I see up above their head. So it's the same idea as everything in my scene going down. So what happens is that there's lenses that actually shift the entire element inside the lens so that when I go up, this lens actually goes down and it keeps those people in my frame. There's another version of that it actually happens in the lens back. It doesn't do it with these individual digital backs like this, but inside a Canon camera, inside a Nikon or a Sony camera, they all do it, whatever. They shift the sensor instead. So if I go up like that, the sensor itself goes down to counteract that motion. And a lot of them claim that you can get a 4 or 5 stop boost out of that. So that conceivably, you could shoot, let's say you're shooting your 250 millimeter lens and you're thinking, okay, well, I got to be at a 250th of a second. Well, if you have a lens stabilizer in there that'll give you a 4 stop stabilization, that means you can go from 250 to 125th, a 60th, 30th, a 15th of a second. And you can hand hold a 200 millimeter lens at a 15th of a second. Now, I think that's probably a bit hyperbole, but certainly you could actually get a stop or two out of it. Make sense? Okay. So anyway, back to this. So there also are C1, C2, and C3. These are exactly the same as they are on Nikon and Sony cameras. This is just going to remember a set of settings that you do in here. Again, what most people do this primarily is to set one up to be a third of a stop increments in sensitivity and the other at a half stop increments. And then CF, this is how you actually set up to actually then go in and actually assign these guys. Again, in most of this stuff, I don't use any of this stuff. I pretty much am a manual shooter for all of this, and we're going to look at other reasons why this is more important than anything else you can actually do on here. The little button at the very top right here, if you push this, it should turn on the light. So we're in a brighter situation, so I don't think that, oh, actually this is a timer up in here. My light is actually this button right down here. So this is a timer up here. So if you want to, get in the shot, you can actually set this timer to fire your camera in, 10 seconds or 5 seconds or whatever, that kind of stuff. Again, I don't use any of this stuff, to be honest with you. This is the light button. So if you click on this, it actually turns on. It's really hard to see that, but it'll turn on that LED so that you can see it at night. This is where you can actually change the focusing pattern of your meter inside your camera. Again, we don't really use this stuff a lot because primarily I'm going to try my best to convince all of you to shoot tethered for the rest of your life, and so this stuff becomes somewhat superfluous. Then there is an auto bracket setting in here. Again, I don't believe in auto bracketing because if you set your camera up to auto bracket, that means you are willing to sacrifice at least 2/3 of the images that you shoot because they won't be exposed correctly. I just believe in perfect exposure for every frame you shoot. So that's my view. I haven't used auto bracketing in 1,000 years. This little plus and minus right here is how you set the increment of your auto bracket. So if you wanted to bracket in 1/3 of a stop or full stops or 2 full stops or all that, you would set that up here. But again, I don't use any of that. What I do use on this camera that I actually love though are these 2 buttons at the same time. You'll see that there's a lock that sits over the top. And what these 2 buttons do, if you tap your camera, you can see I'm at 160th of a second at f/16. If you press both of these buttons at the same time, it'll lock your camera. You'll hear it bleep, and then you'll see this lock on. Then when we go back and tap this, it's actually got my 160th at f/16, but now when I hit any of these wheels to actually change it, I can't change anything. One of the biggest problems that you will run into as a photographer, but also as a tech or as an assistant, is it's so easy to hit some of these things, especially those Canon cameras, that little back wheel that's back by your thumb. It is so easy to hit that thing, and all of a sudden you're 1/3 of a stop off, 2/3 of a stop off. It's your job as a tech to keep your eye on that all the time. When you're in Capture One, it's the #1 mistake that photographers make. This lock will prevent that from happening. To turn the lock off, you actually press those same 2 buttons again, and you'll actually hear it pop off. Sorry. And then it's just lock off. And now when you go back to it, you'll see that you can actually now change shutter speeds and apertures both. So that gets us through the back part of the camera right here. This has got a typical hot shoe on it. I feel sorry for the people in this who have Sonys for one reason. Sony has a proprietary hot shoe now, so that all the hot shoes that existed in the entire history of mankind do not work on Sony cameras, not all of them. There are adapters that you can get. It's a small little sort of like, it looks like a small little cube that you put onto a Sony camera that allows you to then put like a pocket wizard on, that kind of stuff, whatever. Not a bad thing for an assistant to have in their back pocket. So all of a sudden you've got a pocket wizard that won't hook up to a Sony camera. That little adapter will actually re-rig the electronics in there to do it. If we go to the side of the camera right here, you can see that there's a little wheel here that's got a plus and a minus. What is that? It's the diopter adjustment. So again, you would do the same trick here. Tap your camera, go in and take a look through your camera. You're looking for the LED readout that's inside the camera, and you use this to focus on it so that when this is focused, when the LED readout inside your screen is actually in focus, then the camera, your eyes are in focus. So again, you would do this with or without your glasses on, depending on how you want to shoot. This one, you can't take this eyepiece off. So again, you would simply come in and do the edge here using alcohol or any sort of, hand sanitizer, anything for the same reason we were talking about earlier. This thing on the other side over here, this is the shutter, this is the viewfinder. Basically, it's a shutter for the viewfinder. If you twist this up, you'll see that there's a big red thing that comes on your viewfinder. So this again is how you would set this camera up to shoot prolonged periods of time without you having to block the viewfinder with your face. The reason they paint it red is so that you realize that that's what's going on, and you can turn this part to pull it back out. So that gets us through all of this part. On the front of the camera, on the side, so I'm on the left-hand side now, I'm turning the camera over to the left-hand side. This is the release for the lens right here. You pull this back and the lens rotates and comes out, and then it goes back in the same way. There are two kinds of lenses that exist for this camera. This is a Mamiya lens, so you'll see it's a Mamiya C-Core lens. This is an $85, $90 lens. I mean, not 85. This is it's a $500 lens. It's something like that. This, on the other hand, is a very different lens. This is a Schneider lens. You'll know it's different because, number one, it says that it's Schneider is written on it. These are legendary lens manufacturers that work in Germany. However, they farmed this out to Fuji in Japan, so you'll see that this lens is actually made in Japan. But what's important about this lens is this distinction right here. You'll see this is an LS lens. There is a shutter in this lens. And when we get into doing shutter strategies, this thing is going to make a world of difference. So I'm just planting the seed right now. We will talk about shutters next week, but what makes this thing different than this lens right here? This is not an LS lens. This is actually a lens that works just like all 35mm lenses work. It's got apertures in it, but that's it. This lens right here has got aperture blades in it and a shutter as well. It's got everything. It's actually in here as well. But this is a $5,000 lens and this is a $500 lens. So, but you'll see the difference in the optical performance of them as well. But at any rate, over to the side of the camera right now. So that was the lens release right here. You can see in this case right here, this is a digital back. This digital back actually comes off of this camera. To get it off this camera, there is a release. This is the shutter, this is the back release right here, is this button that you push in. This is a lock for it right here. So you push this lock back. Do not do this, just look at me really quick. Do not do this like this. Do not do this standing up. Because if, God forbid, this thing slips out of your hand, it's got 4 feet to fall and it will break. So instead, you always do this over a tabletop, do this on a cart, do this on something, so that the most this thing can fall is going to be 3 inches, right? If this falls here, it's not going to break. If this falls here, it's toast. Make sense? So it's just a thing to help sort of keep in mind. This gets a little bit wonky. You just do it on top of your tabletop. You'll see how this works. So the way you take this off is there's a clamp that's sitting up here at the very top, and then there's a series of cleats that are right here on the bottom. So what we're going to do, just watch me how I do this. You push this button in. First off, you got to pull the release, the lock for the button back so that you can push it in. You push it in, and then you roll this thing out. And you can see this is the sensor. This is the sensor. This is the cleat on the bottom. So when we put this back on our camera, we're going to set the cleat on the bottom and then roll this back in so that it clamps back in. So it looks like this. Again, if you look at the bottom of the camera, you can see there's this shoe right here. So I'm going to take that groove and put it in that shoe. So that goes in like that, and then this rolls back in, and then you have to push this to actually get it to set back in. So, and you'll actually hear something happen in your camera. What's happening in your camera, when you take this thing off, there's a shutter curtain inside here that pops up out of the way so that you can't damage it. So if I pull this back, you'll see that shutter curtain covers this whole area right here, but it opens up now so that without this back on it, I can't push my finger through this thing by mistake. But that's basically what's going on. So again, to put this back on, it rolls back in, and we're good to go. So that's giving me the whole camera part here. That's getting this thing on and off. These two setups that are right over here are for using this on a view camera, because in a view camera, you don't have any electronics that connect to this back. You actually have to make the physical connections using wires, and that's what these ports are about right here. So they will actually, we'll talk about this at some point later on, but that's basically what's going on here. If you open up this little door that's right here, this is actually where you put a CF card into it. To get a CF card in, you would plug it in. To get the card out, it's this little switch at the very top. If you push this, it'll pop out, and then when you push it in again, it'll shove the card out. What's critical about this, and this exists on all cameras, it exists on your cameras as well, is you see this little white dot right here? If there's a card in here and I take an exposure and it's writing to the card, this little dot right here is a red light and it blinks like crazy. If you pop that card out like this, you will destroy the card, and there's a good chance you'll trash the back as well. So this little red light is really important that you pay attention to this. If it is blinking, do not touch anything in your camera. Then on the back end of your camera, finally, if you get back, you'll notice on the back of your camera, let me cover most of that. You'll notice that at the very top right here, there's icons on the corners of this back. If yours is not turned on, again, this is the on-off button right here, so press this little button here to turn your back on. At the very top, there's a little house. If you click on the little house, it's outside the screen. It's a little house. It gives you the beginning of where we're going to actually set this camera up. If you go to the other side, it's actually an arrow that points back. This is how you actually review images, but we can't review anything because we don't have a card in here with any images. This part down here, this one that looks like a grid sort of thing down here, this is how you see all of your not all of your images, but it's how you see multiple versions of what you've already shot. This is your battery indicator back here, and then this is a menu item thing down right here. Again, all of these buttons on the back, other than the home button, are designed to actually edit the images that are in this camera back. We don't use any of that stuff. So to start with, you pick the home part at the very top so that you get these four icons right here. The first one is your camera. This is actually where you can format a card that's actually in the camera itself. This is the camera right down here, this 645 DF. That's where you can control part of what's going on with this camera. So you can see, if you click on the live card right here, I'm just going to click on the button to go over. It's not giving me that because I don't have a card in here. This would be the live view on here. You can actually slide this over. So you can do things like your previews are on, your previews are off, your orientation of your camera is set to auto, all that kind of stuff you can do right here. You'll notice three little dots down at the bottom that indicates there's another screen all the way over. Shutter latency and camera mode. We're going to leave the camera mode in normal, but shutter latency, how many of you guys go far enough back that you had a little point and shoot camera 15, 20 years ago, digital, and you would point it and it wouldn't fire right away, right? You would jam the shutter thing down, and then you had to wait like a quarter of a second or a half a second before it would fire. That's called latency. What is happening in that is that the sensor of those little cameras had to be charged, but you couldn't charge it all the time. If you charged it all the time, your battery got drained out immediately. So what would happen is that when you hit that little button, it would say, charge the sensor really quickly, and the sensor would charge, and then you could fire it. That is what latency is. That is exactly the same thing that happens back here on these cameras. So normal is how we leave latency on this when it's hooked up to a camera like this. When you get to putting this on a view camera, if you want this to actually fire the very first time you fire a shutter with a view camera setup, you would set this to a 0 latency. If you want to do the normal behavior, which is not, you have to fire your shutter, a mechanical shutter, you have to fire it twice for this to make an exposure onto this back. But you save a lot of battery doing it that way. So anyway, for our intents and purposes right now, we leave this at normal. Click on the little house again to go back. Then you can actually click on white balance here Does white balance matter with this camera? No. Isn't this the same as our just discussion about 35 millimeter cameras? If you're shooting in RAW, this does not matter. So I ignore that. Back to the little house again. At the little gear that's down at the bottom, if you click on that, this will bring you in. This is how you basically just set up the camera, right? So you can do how bright is the screen, you can do is your beep on, power management, you can scroll over in this way. This part does matter. The storage on here is set to auto. You can also have this set to CF, which stands for, sorry guys, the screen is so bright you can't see it, so you're gonna have to be looking at your own camera. But on here it says CF, that's a CF card, you're gonna write to that. The FW stands for Firewire. There's two connections of this camera. If you look at the very bottom, there's a place for a cord to go in right here. This is a Firewire cable. This is old legacy Apple stuff. Most people, you have to have a computer that's at least 10, 15 years old to actually use Firewire. Nobody uses this anymore, but that's how old these digital backs are. And then finally, there's USB, and that's the cable connection that goes on the side of the camera right here. This is what you always want to use. However, if you're having trouble getting this to connect, say, to your computer, you're having tethering issues, instead of having this set to auto, because auto says, well, do you have a card? Okay, I'll shoot to card. Oh, are you connected to a computer? I'll shoot to the computer. If you're having trouble with that, you can actually come in here this and say, if I'm going to shoot tethered, I'm going to only set this to shoot on USB. Sometimes that will fix your problem. Usually auto works, and that's where I would leave it by default, but just so that you know, you can set this to be USB or force it to only shoot to card. In the file format, you'll see that this is actually set up wrong. So there is an IIQ-L and an IIQ-S. So again, IIQ is the raw file format for all Capture One film backs, digital backs, not film backs. This again is that raw. One is a large raw, one is a small raw. Everything can read the large raw, nothing can read the small raw, so you want to make sure that this is set to IQL. And then check disk. This is actually can be on or off. This would be when you would actually throw in a card and to check to see if the card was in good order. And continue to go over. This is all about doing date and time. Again, you would want to have these things set correctly, your language, but also ask before deleting. This is just if you are doing your editing on this digital camera back, then when you go to throw a picture in the trash, a thing pops up and says, you really want to throw that away? That's what that's all about. And then one last one here, you have a restore to defaults, you have a firmware upgrade, whatever, and then an about in there as well. If you click on the little house one last time, the last thing we have to go over is this ISO. If you click on the ISO, you'll notice that there are only 5 possibilities. There's a 50, 100, 200, 400, and 800. The sensors in here are very different than the sensors that are in a 35 millimeter camera. They're actually superior in some ways. The first time you shoot a picture with one of these, your jaw will drop when you see the quality of these files. It's insane. However, that comes at a cost. The sensors that are in your 35 millimeter camera are called CMOS sensors. CMOS sensors are really in their own right, by themselves, whatever, they're pretty shitty. That's why people have avoided them for years. But the software has gotten so good, that's the only sensors you can get nowadays. So, but it's a sensor, it's a mediocre sensor with exceptional software. The sensor that is in this camera, it's a CCD sensor, not a CMOS, but a CCD. The one that's in here is exceptional work of art, but it suffers a huge number of problems, and ISO is one of them. You guys wouldn't hesitate to shoot at a 400 ISO with a 35 millimeter camera, would you? A 35 mil, you set this to 400 ISO, it looks like you're shooting on sandpaper. You set it to an 800 ISO, you damn near can't tell the image because of the noise. 50 and 100 is where you need to play with this camera. And so that's a massive limitation compared to a Canon or a Nikon or a Sony, where you can easily go up to, see, I go up to 1200, I don't even think about it. That's not even a possibility on this camera. Questions about this? All right, so you guys have been checked out on this, so you can actually use these guys. You will use one for an assignment that's coming up, not this week, but next week. I'm going to put my lens cap back on. I'm going to leave the batteries in this. I am going to turn everything off, though. So if you turn the release around your shutter button back to L, it'll turn this part off. It doesn't turn off your camera back automatically, although mine just did. If it didn't, you would just hold down that button on the back of your camera to turn that part out. And then I didn't show you the last thing about this. So in some of these cases, you will see this. Do you guys have this in your case? It's a little white box. All right, so I'm going to show you how to use this. Again, very dangerous, but I'm going to show you how to use it anyway. So go ahead, you can pull it out. I'm not going to actually have you do it. I just want to show you how it actually works. There's a couple of things in this box. What's interesting, what's not in this box, is the cleaning liquid. So they've actually packed other things in here. So the first thing that you can pull out, if you pull everything out of the box, does everybody have this little piece of white plastic? Is that in your box? Yeah. So what this little piece of white plastic is for is there's software. Every company's software will do this. No universal software will do this. So so Adobe's software can't do this. But if you have a Canon camera and you use Canon software, you can do the trick I'm going to show you right now. If you use Phase's software, Capture One, you can do the same trick. If you're shooting a Sony, you have to use Sony software. If you're shooting Nikon, you have to use Nikon software. But what you do is this. If you pop this off and take this off, you cover your lens with this piece of plastic, and then you make an exposure that is a medium gray, medium to light gray. And what happens is so what that exposure will do is it will create a dust map on your sensor. So if you've got, again, just a medium to light gray, you can see all the dust particles that are sitting on your sensor because they all go black. So you take that one file and you load it into your proprietary software in the part where they talk about camera calibration. There's a spot for it. And you'll load it in there. And what it'll do is it'll create a map of the dust that's on your sensor. And then you can use that map to spot that dust off of 1,000 files in 5 seconds. Because the dust doesn't move, the map doesn't move. The dust that's on your camera, it might move over a week, so you would do another one in a week. But this way, it'll do dust removal on 1,000 images like in a heartbeat, right? It's tricky. I'm not going to say that this is the end all. I don't shoot that way because I'm not looking to have 1,000 frames of anything. I'm looking to have one great frame of one shot. So I don't really mind going in and spotting something out, but I don't like using proprietary software either. But anyway, just so you know, that's what that's about. The other thing that's this thing that's in the back of it, this metal plate right here. This metal plate is actually designed to store your digital back. So the way this thing works is, again, I'm going to pull the release off of this. I'm going to roll the back out like this. Then you take this safety plate, and again, you'll see there's a channel on the bottom. It goes into this channel that's right here. This locks in, and you roll it forward. And most people store their stuff like this. They don't have this attached to a camera. So that's basically what this guy is all about. You'll also notice that there's a flip side to this. There's another piece that looks like this that actually has got a channel on the bottom, and this goes on top of your camera just to protect it. So I'm not going to use that part, but what we are going to get to is the cleaning part. So again, I'm going to pull this off. So again, this is the release part right here. We'll let that go. So this is actually off. So what you've got here, this is actually your sensor. Again, there's a protective cover on this. There's a lens of it. I can actually spot a piece of dust that's right here. So again, your first move always would be a rocket. So again, you would hold this. Most people will hold this upside down when they do it, so that if you do manage to get dust off, that it won't fall right back down onto the camera sensor while you're doing it. Guys, we're almost done with this, and we'll take a break, I swear. And that actually got that piece of dust off, so that part's great. But If you don't have that, what most of these all phase backs come with, and even though it's a Mamiya, it's actually owned by Phase now, they come with this little plastic piece right here. This little plastic piece is designed to work on more than one camera back. So if you open this up, you'll see that one side of it is too big to actually fit on that sensor, but the other side of it is designed to exactly do that sensor. So you actually grab a piece of microfiber cloth, so the stuff that's in this, so this is the piece of cloth. In most of these kits originally, you have two solutions. You've got a blue solution and a clear solution, an A and a B. So the trick is you set this up, you get the paddle that's got the right size, you put your little stuff around it like this, and then you can actually pull this tight. You put the blue solution across this, and then you take this, you put it at your sensor, and you scrape down once. You do not do this repeatedly. If you don't solve the problem in that first scrape, you really should be nervous. Some people will hit this a second time, but at any rate, once that is clean, you need to then clean the cleaner. So you move this to another part of this little cover right here. You do this again, and you put on the clear solution, and you do the same thing. Now, these are microfiber cloths, so these are designed to work without solution. But again, doing this kind of work on a sensor, you've just got to be nervous as hell. That's all I can say. This sensor in its day was a $40,000, this back was a $40,000 back. You can find them used now for probably, I don't know, $500, something like that. But the latest version of Phase digital backs are at least $40,000 or $50,000. So do you really want to take a $40,000 sensor and start scraping shit across it? Probably not. Okay, questions about any of this? All right, you guys are checked out on this stuff. I'm sorry, how much did what? A setup like this? Well, see, this is a Phase back, though. This is not a Mamiya back. The digital back itself is a Leaf, which was Mamiya, but now Phase owns everybody. So the body is made by Phase, the lens is Mamiya, and the back is Mamiya, but Phase owns them all now. But a typical rig like this, I mean, are you buying this generation or are you buying a brand new one? This generation, you can get a digital setup for this for probably under $3,000. I mean, the price of a of a new 35mm camera would probably be more than this. So again, big difference in lenses. These are pedestrian lenses, for lack of a better way of putting it. These are works of art. I mean, this lens. When you see the difference, when you shoot with this stuff, it's just insane. This is really beautiful glass. So this stuff, again, I don't know what a new version of this is. I don't even know if they still make this lens anymore, that kind of stuff. But you can look it up. I mean, again, the used market, the way I always feel about this stuff is I don't mind buying used stuff as long as, if you buy from reputable places. So Adorama in New York is really reputable. KEH in New York is really reputable. B&H is really reputable. They have a grading system for all their used gear. So anything that would be a 9 or a 9 or up would be, I wouldn't hesitate to buy it. Wouldn't hesitate. 8, 8.5. So what they do is their system tends to work with pluses. So you'll have an 8, an 8 plus, an 8 plus plus, and then a 9, and then a 9 plus, a 9 plus plus, and then 10 would be considered open box, not used. So, questions about this? Are we good? Oh, I have no idea. I don't think that's supposed to be in there. Let me just see. Oh, how cute. Yeah, it's a gift to you. I don't know what that's for. Okay, guys, let's call this, let's call this, just be back at 5 after 4, okay? We've got a lot to get through, and I want to try and get through it all today. But do me a favor, put these up and get them back to the cage.
Where should we put these?
Just take them all back to the,
Front desk?
yeah.
Alright.
So guys, I want to work, oh, wait, never mind. Jumping the gun. Okay. Okay, so super clamp. So the thing about this is, what it's really designed to do is it's designed to go around round things. So you can see this bottle right here, if I put this in, this is designed to clamp down on something that's actually round shaped like that. That's what that whole V part in here is about. And so this, you just screw this top part down here, and it clamps down there and it holds the bottle. That's sort of what it's like. But it's really good for going on like, well, bars like that make up the clothes racks over there, but also the bars that we hang seamless from, all that kind of stuff. So what a lot of people will do is when they're actually rigging seamless, they will put this on top of a C-stand, and then they'll put a bar in here that runs all the way across, and another one on the other side. So it's a much more secure than, I know most of you guys rig, certainly the half seamlesses with just an arm going out. Nobody really does that in a professional studio. That's all just way too dicey. So you have a solid bar that goes across. It looks like this. And so this bar, again, a C-stand on both sides, and then this gets rigged. Yeah, this gets rigged like this. And so then this is my setup, right? So then this can't roll. That's why these are so much safer. So if you A-clamp a seamless to this thing doesn't roll. All of that part matters. So anyway, that's what this is about. However, these clamps are more universal than just doing round things like that. That's where this other insert comes in. You can ask for them. They have a bunch of them back there. People lose them all the time, but this insert that looks like this, you can't see that at all. It looks like that. This actually goes into the bed of this. So this goes in. You'll see there's two little cleats on the bottom. It goes in like this, and then you just push it down in here. And so now this thing, instead of clamping down on something circular, clamps down on something square. So this is perfect to clamp on lumber, a 2x4, a flat, the flats that we have in here, those set flats, this clamps down on that. And then this other pin can go into a knuckle. So, I mean, that's how these things work. They're really, really, really good. Unfortunately, people don't know what to do with these things when they don't use them, but if you take this out, they just pull out. They're in there by friction. But what it's designed to do is, you can see in here, there is a notch in this part right here. This notch goes right underneath the back nut in here, and you push it up, and you'll hear it click. This thing will still completely tighten down, but it'll hold this in place. So then this is how you store these things, so that they're always with it, so you can use them or not. To get the pin, or to work with the pin, this part matters here. I'm going to get this off so that you can see, so it looks more like yours normally looks. So to get this pin off, it's a two-step process. You loosen up this back screw on the back. This is the thing that screws down tight on it. But then this is a release. This is a safety release for this pin. So right now, even though this thing is completely loose, I can't pull this pin out. You need to push this in, then I can pull the pin out. Loosen that a little bit more. I can pull the pin out now. You'll see that the insert in here is octagonal or sextagonal. So is this side of the pin. These are actually how you rig this. This, again, to push this all the way in, you need to push this safety in so that it goes all the way in. Then you let go. It's seated, and then you tighten this up. So sometimes you will get pins that do not have this hexagonal part. Then you end up doing the round part. And the problem with the round part is, as you can see in this one, this whole thing, there's no flat edge to this round part. And so the problem is that even though you can get this thing in and you can tighten it, it will still roll on you. This will still twist. Mine is still twisting on me because you're trying to actually hold something that's round, and it'll slide across this. Whereas the ones that have faces on them, you cannot twist these things. So this will not go anywhere. So it's always, that's how you always get it in. It's the hex side that's always in there. Besides the other end that you would typically store something on, it's very difficult to get like a Speedotron mount onto this thing. It's really difficult to do that part. So at any rate, that's how these guys work. These tighten up. These are a godsend. People use these. I've got thousands of these. Anyway, Maffer clamp. Oh, another great trick about this is that when you're trying to actually tighten this up, I see people do this all the time. They start to tighten this and it just like takes forever. What you do instead, the trick for this is that once you get the tube that's in between here, you press this down on it, and that relieves all the tension on this, and then you can spin this thing really, 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 really fast, and then you're good to go. Just a time saver. All right, so has everybody had a chance to look at this really quick? All right, good. So now we're going to go to power packs. We're going to get into exposure in a big way next week, but I want to talk about what power packs are, how these things work, what you're really doing with them. Most of you guys are familiar with Speedotron stuff, correct? A little bit, at least anyway. Okay, so what we really need to think about with a power pack, what it does is, in this particular power pack, but all power packs work the exact same way. They work on the exact same principle. Inside these things are what they call capacitors. And what a capacitor is, the way it's actually made up, if you can imagine like 100,000 layers of aluminum foil that are separated by something the width of the size of a hair, right? So there's thousands of these that are separated. So it's again like tin foil. It's separated by just the smallest sliver, whatever. When you apply electricity to that, it stores that electricity between all of those layers. And then when you give it a way out, when you give it a way to actually escape that capacitor, then all of the energy that gets stored up in there goes out really quickly all at once. So what happens when you plug this thing in, you guys mostly know this, when you plug these things in and you turn it on, there's like a 3-second delay for it to charge up, right? You turn it on, and it takes a little while for this little light to, here, I'm gonna go ahead and plug mine in. You guys don't need to plug stuff in yet, but just so that you can see what I'm talking about. Give me 1 sec. So when I turn this on, that's modeling light only here. But when I turn the power on, you'll see this little thing up at the very top. This little thing up at the very top. It'll take a little while for the light to actually come on, to charge up. So I'm going to turn this on, and that little beep just tells me this is now charged. So inside this, there are 3 capacitors. There's one on this side, one in the middle, and one on this side over here. They've all 3 charged up right now, and what ends up happening is that the time, I'm going to go ahead and hang on 1 second. All right, I'm going to fire this pack. It's set up to fire the full 2400 watt seconds right now, so I'm going to fire this. We'll see how long this thing takes to charge. 1,000, 2, 1,000. So a little over 2.5 seconds, 3 seconds. What's happening is that it takes that 2.5 seconds worth of power out of here. It stores it in that capacitor in all those layers. But then when you fire this thing, it comes out of this power pack at 125th of a second. That, in effect, massively amplifies the power, right? 3 seconds worth of energy in that then is delivered in 125th of a second. It's a massive increase. It's not an increase in power. It's the same amount of energy, but because it's coming out so much faster, it's just that much brighter. That's how these things ultimately work. And this power pack, close to my, if I'm going to set this close to my face like this, I can overpower the sun easily. Easily. So does that kind of make sense what's going on in here? So this recharge time is massively important, and it has to do with this. And it's one of the things most people screw up. So if you take a look at this side of the power pack right here, you'll notice that there is a recycle fast that sits up here. And they don't mark it, but the opposite of that would be a recycle slow. The reason these things matter is that if you are in a house that's got older wiring, they will have 15 amp fuses in there, and these packs draw power too quickly to actually, for that fuse to actually, or the circuit breaker to actually function. So the fuses just keep blowing all the time. They just keep blowing over and over and over again. So to avoid that, you turn your power pack off, you turn this down to slow recycle, because what it does is it draws power out of that 15 amp line at a much slower rate. So now let's see how long this thing takes to charge up. So I've got this on slow. I'm going to fire it. It's now at full. We'll see. We'll count how long this takes to recharge. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000. So at least twice as long. Why does this matter? I can't tell you the number of times I'm walking around the studio and I'll see people have this set up with 3 or 4 power packs, and one of them will be set to slow and everybody else is to fast. And people start shooting. The one that's on slow doesn't ever have a time to fully charge. So you have a variable light that's going on in the background depending on how fast you shoot. So this matters when you come in to do this part. So I'm going to give you the greatest trick of all, the best piece of advice about working with a power pack that I can. It's basically my method. The way I work with this thing is I do this. Before I even plug this thing in, so I'm going to go back all the way back to the beginning. I'm going to unplug this and this. So this is what I do with a power pack every single time. So I go in, I plug in the 800 side. Again, you can pick whatever side you want to plug into it. That doesn't matter. It's just that you do the same routine over and over and over, because that way you catch the mistakes. So I plug in on the 800 side. I isolate this switch over here. I check that the rheostat is all the way up. I make sure that the recycling is on fast. And you see these two things right here? These two things right here? These are fuses. If this power pack is overheated, this power reset right here, this little thing, this little white thing will pop up. You'll see it sitting up. And if you go to push it back down, if the pack is still too hot, you can't push this down. But when the pack finally cools down, you can push this thing back down. It's the one thing people never ever look at and think about. People just think that the pack has died. They haven't. They just need to reset the fuse on it. Make sense? Good on that part? So I'm always setting it up this way, and then I'll go ahead and plug it in. And then any adjustments that I need to make, I can go ahead and make. So back to the pack itself. So 3 capacitors that are in here. There's one on this channel A right here, and you can see there's 800 watt seconds that's sitting right next to it. There's this channel B that's got 1200 watt seconds that are in it. And then there's this channel C, which has got 400 watt seconds. If we add all of these up, 800 plus 1200 is 2000 plus 400 is 2400. This is a 2400 power pack. That's where the name comes right here, 2400 power pack. Most power packs in the world are actually full power packs are 2400 power packs. The D2s, Profotos that we have over here are not, but they're big brothers. The Profoto that are actually more packs like this actually are. Broncolor does the same thing. It's a 2400 power pack. All the Profoto, they're higher end. Some people will do a 3000, but not a whole ton of people will do that. But at any rate, to go back to this part right here, to control the amount of power that I've got coming out of here, it's all about watt seconds. So we're a little ahead of the game right here. We're going to talk about exposure equivalents next week. But this is the amount of energy that's actually coming out. And this works like f-stops. So really quickly, not to get into it too deep, but what is the difference in the amount of light? If I set my camera to f5.6 and then I move it to f8, did I increase or decrease my light? I'm at 5.6. I stop down to F8. Am I letting more light in or less? Isn't the aperture on F8 smaller than the aperture on 5.6? So less light, right? How much less? A stop. How much is a stop? Double or halving. So the single most important takeaway from halving, if you want to get a tattoo on your ass that means something in photography, put in doubling and halving. It's the mantra that everyone lives by. So that's what's going on in this madness right here. So I'm going to start off to just sort of have this really quick conversation about this. Right now, if I combine this 400, I'm combining it with the 1200 in the middle. That's what this switch is right here. I'm doing the same thing with the 800. I'm combining it into this 1200. So all of these now are combined into one single unit. Does that make sense? And so if I were to fire this right now, it would be the whole 2400 watt seconds. Again, the rheostat is turned all the way up. So it's going to let the whole thing go. It does not matter where I plug this. I can plug it into here. All 2400 watt seconds will come out because these are all combined. If I plug it into here, it's still going to kick out 2400 watt seconds. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to take, can I borrow, do you guys have a head over here? Can I borrow, just, yeah, great. I'll be black, I promise. I'm going to add another head right here. So now what's going to happen is that the pack that's going to go out, it's going to be 2400 watt seconds come out, but these heads are going to split that evenly. One of them is going to be 1200 watt seconds, the other is going to be 1200 watt seconds. So what did I effectively do to the first head? Did I decrease its power or increase its power when I added the second head? I decreased it by how much? Half, which is how much in stops? One stop. I just took off one stop. Does that make sense? It's a strategy that's going to come up later, so I just wanted you guys to be aware of that part right here. So I'm going to pull this off. If, on the other hand, I isolate this pack, this capacitor here, and I do this capacitor here, and now I plug one head into the 800 and another into the 400, this center part is being ignored. Their power is being stored in here, but we're not using it. Because we've isolated this off, this is 800 by itself. We've isolated this off, it's 400 by itself. So now in this case, what can you tell me about the relationship in these two heads? Say what? One is twice as powerful as the other. So the head that's coming out of the 800 is a stop brighter than the one that's coming out of the 400. Isn't that a standard key to fill ratio that a lot of people use? It's sitting right here. I haven't done anything else. I haven't gotten all fancy with any of this shit. Does that sort of make sense, everybody? What's going on here? Okay, I'm going to pull one of these heads out. We're just going to take a look at what else is going on here. So, strategies about this. So, if I start at my maximum, I'm going to put all of these together here. I'm going to start at my maximum. So now everything is put together. I've got a full 2400 watt seconds here. Does that make sense to everyone? So if I need to lose a stop, what I do is I isolate the 4 and the 8, and I plug this into the 12. Now I've just lost one stop. If I need to lose another stop, it's tricky because there isn't a 600 on this pack. But can I borrow that head again really quick? If I had to get to that 600 and there was no other way to do it, I would actually plug this second head in. And then I take this head and I bury it. I put this over here in the corner of the room. Don't set it on the floor. It'll burn the floor. But I just put it off my set. I shoot it into a garbage can. That's the one that I use a whole lot, whatever. They call this bleeding ahead. What I'm doing is that because I wanted 600 watt seconds, I've got 12. But again, if I put a second head in, they share that, right? They both have 600 now. And then I just put this off of my set and shooting into something that it doesn't have any impact on my set, right? It's hidden. It's not doing anything except robbing power from the other head so that I get my 600 watt seconds. Does that sort of make sense? Okay, so then let's look at the range that we can actually do with this. So the minimum that I can get out of here is 400 watt seconds. So I'm going to put this on 400 isolated. But then we have this rheostat, and the rheostat that's on the top is in stops. It's in 1/3 stops. So you'll see right here, it starts at full, it goes to a -1 in 3 clicks. That's down 1/3, 2/3, full stop. 1/3, 2/3, second stop, and then finally all the way down. So this rheostat has got a range of 3 stops. Make sense? All the way down is -3. So if I'm on 400 watt seconds right now, how many watt seconds do I have coming out of here if this is set to -3 stops? So again, doubling and halving, doubling and halving. If I cut 400 in half one time, that's one stop, what will I have? 200 watt seconds. If I cut that in half, 100 watt seconds. I cut that in half, 50 watt seconds. If I bleed a head off of this, 25 watt seconds. That is the least I can get. That is the smallest amount of power that I can get set out of this pack, right? But then I can go, again, I can go up my 3 stops, so then I get to 400 watt seconds. If I want to go to the next stop up, I go to 800 watt seconds and isolate. Can I do one more stop up from that? What's one more stop up from 800? 1600. Can I do 1600 in this rig? How do I do it? Exactly. I combine the 4 and the 12, gives me 1600, right? And then how much more if I go to 24 is it? So this is the problem a lot of people run into. If I'm at 1600 right now, what is the next stop? What would it be? 32. What's halfway in between? 24. So this is an extra half a stop. Don't worry, guys. We're going to work with this in spades, so don't worry about that part. So safety about this power pack when you do it. So when I work with these power packs, I leave them unplugged until I get them rigged. I go ahead and get them rigged, and then again, you can turn modeling light on and you can turn power on. In this case, the modeling light did not come on here. Why? One of two things. It's either the switch on the top, which is what it was, or it's the modeling light's actually burnt out on this. So everybody take their head. Pull the reflector off. If you've got the cords close to it, just kind of move them out of the way. You don't need to uncoil it, but just take the reflector off. Okay. So you can put your hands on this strobe tube. This is a Pyrex shell. The strobe tube itself is actually inside this Pyrex shell. So make sure, again, that if you do this, you want to make sure that you're not plugged into the power pack. I don't even like to have the cord plugged into the power pack. I'm just make sure that there's no chance electricity is going to come through this. You can actually pull this tube out. It just pulls straight out. So grab it and just pull it straight out. And then that's what it looks like here. You can set this down. However, you cannot touch this next thing. So this next thing is the modeling light. The problem with this modeling light, though, is that this is the glass on this is the actual tube. So if you touch this with your finger, what happens is, you guys have all cooked, right? You go in the kitchen to cook, right? If you're frying something and you really want to get that, hunk of meat or that fish or that whatever really blistered and whatever, you put oil in the skillet, right? It makes everything hotter. It transfers heat more. Well, the same thing happens to this. If you get your fingertip on the edge of this or anywhere on this glass, that spot will then be incredibly hotter than the whole rest of the tube, and it will melt. And the minute it melts, it loses its vacuum on the inside, and the modeling light goes. So when that happens, modeling lights are $35, $40. I mean, they're incredibly expensive. So if this thing had burnt out, I don't mind grabbing it with my fingers and taking it out because it's already dead. But when you go to put the next one in, you always do it using your t-shirt or actually anything else. You can use a t-shirt, you can use a Kleenex, you can use anything to keep the oil from getting on here. But if you come in here, you can actually see that this thing twists. There's two little teeth in there, and there's two little sort of a teeth situation right in here. So you put this in, see if I can see it better. You put this in like this, and then it twists, and you can see those little pins catch it right there. So that's how you change these things. And again, you don't ever touch this thing with your fingers, kind of like that. So then this, the 3 pins that are on this will only go in here one way. You can't put this in the wrong way. So if you start, like I started, and it's exactly right, but if you start in the wrong orientation, you'll see it won't fit in any other way. So you just keep turning this around till you get it to the right configuration, and then this plugs back in. And then this thing is good to go. Oh, I forgot. We got to be breaking this down. Yep, that can all go. We'll get to that next week. Guys, we're going to leave it at this. We've gotten through what I really wanted to get through today. So again, in terms of this whole setup here, get yourself into the habit of doing it the same way every single time, and then we will jump into this in a big way next week.